It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. A lot going on right as we're going live. There's bombings taking place in Iran for the United States, Israel, and the ongoing illegal war that it is. So we're going to be talking about that today. There's going to be things happening as we're live. So feel free to chime in the chat and let me know if there's anything happening that we should be talking about. But there's a lot of other things I want to talk about today as well. That'll be the latter half. So kind of potentially give it a little bit of time to develop and see if anything happens beyond what I have lined up for today. But some of the things I wanted to get to on top of the interesting back and forth over the last couple of days with Israel and Iran, United States and Iran, and then the alleged Apache helicopter, or excuse me, the allegation that the Apache helicopter was shot down by Iran. It's an interesting conversation because even coming from U.S. information and intelligence, the suggestion is one of two things: either that it was a mechanical issue, or that they actually ran into the drone. What I can find is that it's coming from Donald Trump and his administration making the argument that it was something, that it was an attack. I'm not sure if this is something, and we'll get into my opinions about it all, the facts, of course, which are important, make it clear where I'm giving you my opinions. But I think it's very interesting that it appears to be sort of a false flag of opportunity, if you will. Sort of whether it could have just been something where there was an accident that took place or some kind of action that was not authorized, that this is how they cover that. But I'm not even sure if I think that lines up with what Trump's current interests are. But it's interesting to get into to see where we currently are with, in the midst of the conversation of Americans becoming fully aware that Israel, at the very least, is influencing policy, which I've been saying for a very long time. And you get a lot of this dishonest framing as if we're saying Israel controls everything and controls the world and everything. I've never made that argument. Is it possible? Of course. I honestly don't even think that it goes to an entire all or nothing kind of conversation, but that's how people will try to undermine the growing awareness of another country having influence over American policy, because they don't have an interest in you knowing that. But we're going to talk about a couple of other things to start that I think are interesting and important. One we've talked about quite a lot. It has to do with Thomas Matthew Crooks and Butler, and an interview that I'm suddenly blanking on his name, Silva just had with Tucker Carlson. And there's a lot of important information in there. I'm probably going to touch on other parts of it, but I wanted to make sure we heard at least some of the statements he made and be critical, like we should have from any claim, from anybody, but asking ourselves what this means, especially for those that are still finding ways to believe in this government and in Donald Trump in the moment in particular. It's pretty unnerving. To understand how much they could be lying about at such a grand scale and have pretty much everybody see it and have something like Tucker Carlson point to it, and we still don't really see much change. And then I actually want to make sure we also highlight a great article Derek Brose put out today about another example of the Trump administration. I don't even know what you would call it. Turning on its own people, even though many of them don't seem to care, but I argue the majority does. And this has to do with fluoride or any number of MAHA discussions, food dyes, and COVID-19 vaccines. But yet again, we have an example of Donald Trump's administration pushing back against something they told you they would fight for. And that's even confusing the way I said that, but ultimately stopping the change, the awareness of fluoride and what it's doing to our bodies and our children's IQs. And they, even with the information that came out, they're pushing back to essentially keep fluoride in your water. It's pretty disgusting. I want to make sure we point to the USS Liberty discussion, even though we've had it many times. I do want to make sure we hear what Massey had to say and discuss what that means in the current context, and some AI infiltration kind of stuff, and a quick note to an AI discussion we will have coming up. But then the rest of this, we're going to get into what's happening in the Middle East and the interesting deceptive nature of all of it and the many different moving parts around it. And I genuinely think that there's stuff happening that Donald Trump All right. Let's see if everybody's still here. Let's see. I got to check everything and make sure we're still moving here. That was interesting. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Let me know if everything's okay. Actually, let me double check my audio settings here. Yep, it's on the, there we go. Good, good. Just give me a second to get everything set back up and we'll get right back to it. Get back in the right place. All right. Now, one thing I wish, by the way, for what, there's a storm ongoing, but, in the life of TLAV, that's just the way this works. We just, get shoved off the platform here and there, whatever it was. What I wish sometimes is if there was an issue like this, that there could be like a fill-in, like music that would start playing. Like, if you have $1 million in a studio and get funded by mainstream media, you can do those things. But it'd be nice if we had something on StreamYard where it could like insert music or something like that. But let me just make sure everything gets, audio was wrong for a second because it was the wrong setting because it had to restart itself. So let me know in the chat, make sure it looks like YouTube one isn't resetting, but I think we're good. What I'm going to do really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, is play something just so I can reset up I have to get my video set back up and everything ready and we'll get right back to it. Honestly, I was really just kind of getting started. So we haven't even really got into everything just yet. Good. Looks like everything's refreshing. Good. All right. Let me play something really quickly just to get started and then we'll get the videos back up and we'll get right into starting with Derek Rose's article. On that note, by the way, though, if something like that happens, I just like you guys did, just hang tight. Hopefully you won't have to. What I worry about is sometimes that happens. It sort of like chops off the live stream and have to restart something new. But if you guys hang out, hopefully I can come right back to the same stream in the future, just considering that. All right, so let me play this and I'll be right back, guys.
From the President's office in the White House in Washington, D.C., we present an address by the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
In holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Well, I picked the wrong clip since that's a very short one, but that's good enough. We got make sure I didn't hear something else. Okay. I got up the main part that we can get going on and I can come back to the videos. So back to where we were in general. I'm going to come back to that. I was making sure that loaded. We're going to talk about Derek's article here in a second, but just in case we had anything else that I wanted to get into off the bat here, let me reorganize this really quickly. So guys, again, especially for the podcast listening tomorrow, I'm just kind of, I'm doing things in the background right now, juggling everything to get it all back into place. So sorry if I'm taking a second to get this moving. All right. So overall, what I was basically just saying, I think, was the different points we're going to talk about today and the interesting nature of what's happening in regard to foreign policy. And I think the last thing I was saying was sort of that Donald Trump, isn't even aware himself of some of these things that I think are happening. And I find that very revealing. And even the point about the Butler, interesting point we're going to talk about. The insane, the idea that we can be aware of something was one thing I think I already said, and have it be so very obvious and discussed at such a high level. And yet nonetheless, it is from the controlling level acted like it's completely false, even from the side that would usually be against, I guess, Donald Trump or the left-right paradigm kind of illusory thing. But I think it's interesting that we can see this kind of stuff coming out and nothing's really been resolved about crooks or the autopsy or any of this stuff. And the people who would usually be the most resistant, the most aggressive about calling it out are the ones that aren't really saying anything. And I find that very telling as always. But before we get to that part, which will be the next one, I wanted to highlight this just for you guys to see. And I really do think this is astounding. Federal court overturns historic fluoride ruling as Trump admin fights to keep fluoride in water. This is exactly how we framed it last time. They knew this was dangerous, and instead of doing something about it, like they told you was their mandate, they fought to keep it in your water. And by the way, it's the same thing Biden did. In fact, just since we had wasted some time getting started there, I'll probably just point to this. Make sure you check it out. Derek and I, I'm sure, will talk about it. But the larger point around this is that you have the effort coming from them, despite the evidence, to stop this. And what's frustrating is that they're not using information. They're not saying, well, we disagree. We think fluoride is okay for you. What they're doing is saying, well, the group who fought to expose the fact that we now see that it's dangerous made some procedural errors. And that's disputed, even, by the way, about whether or not there was a scope that they went farther, like when they went outside their scope, or whether Judge Chen allowed that in the original viewing of the evidence. And so what you're getting are people that are going, oh, there was a basically violated procedure and they went outside their scope in this discussion, so we should just shove it back to the original part. I'll only look at evidence after this year. And that's coming from a group that claims to want to fight for your health. And you're going to let a procedural issue that is debatable in the first place allow them to keep fluoride in your water? That sounds like an obvious effort using law and manipulation within it and the legal system to keep you in a position they want you in. That's not people fighting for you. It's just not. Now, one thing I'm going to get into that I was possibly considering today, we had a great discussion this morning with Tim Hincliffe, and this is his platform, sociable.co. This is a really crazy topic. I'm going to make a whole point about this. I think I might even have him on for an interview, but he discussed this called Digital Embassies Justify the Resource-Sucking, Land-Grabbing, Energy-Consuming, Water-Depleting Construction of Data Centers for Total Surveillance and Control. The idea of these digital embassies, it's very unnerving when you understand how, at least I see it connecting in with the transition of governance. This is sort of a connective tissue between the actual data center, technicality side of it with the actual enforcement arm, in a sense. And it may not be, read the article and you get more so of what I'm saying. But I just wanted to give his important work a shout out. Make sure you check this out, read it for yourself. I will be talking about this again, whether or not we even get into, which I'm planning on, and I will, a more in-depth for the 15th time discussion of AI, data centers, and so on. But this one I think is important for you to check out. Now, this is the thing I was talking about in regard to Tucker Carlson and the interview about Thomas Matthew Crooks. Now, this is Ken Silva. This is his conversation with Tucker Carlson about a lot of things, but he gets into specifically his research around this and the autopsy and some weird things that happened that, of course, seem to tie back to somebody who was tied to October 7th. You can decide that's meaningless. It may be, but I find this to be very interesting. Now, I included the entire interview that you should watch. It's important, but I think what's this clip that seems to be shared by just about everybody outside of the people that want to ignore anything that makes Trump look bad. This in this case for the podcast, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. This clip is pretty interesting and revealing, I think.
Another big unanswered question I have has to do with this seemingly incomplete toxicology report, which, I hesitate to mention this because I don't know the significance of this, but the person who wrote this report, the medical examiner in Pittsburgh who autopsied Crooks, released the body for cremation with fragments and still inside, insists that Zalaponi never hit him, and then doesn't test certain specimens from Crooks or didn't put him in his report. This guy is actually a dual Israeli citizen who was in Israel after October 7th, helping identify the bodies there. So, again, this
actually.
Now, before Tucker responds, just in general to think about, again, even if you don't even think that's important, the idea of the things they were going over, which they go into more in discussion in this interview, but about these things that are never resolved, that the ones out there exposing the deep state don't seem to care about, which is that they never fully flesh this out. And as they briefly mentioned here, the idea that there are things within the autopsy or things that happened before the body was cremated that scream a cover-up. Now, what's that a cover-up of? You can decide for yourself. Whether you think there was even an assassination attempt, which, by the way, we've been questioning since the very beginning. I'll show you some of our work. Not to say that we ever knew entirely, because we didn't. I don't think anybody does. But I think you can entirely prove that there's something that's a lie in all of this. Like, for example, that the way he was facing made it literally impossible for the location they said he was in to be able to hit his ear. That's basic understanding of the angles they were standing at. I don't care what anybody says. I can prove that. And I did right at the beginning. The point here is that there's so much around this that nobody seems, I should say the people that are interested in the status quo seem to care about focusing on. Not even the supposed other side that wants to go after Trump no matter what. They all want this to go away. I think that tells you everything. Anybody that's interested in asking questions continually beyond this are either people that care about the truth or are recognizing that most people do and now see they have to lean that way. Opportunism, profiteering, whatever it is. But you can see this group that never seems to change because their game is keeping the system. maintaining the system, the status quo, the usual, right? They don't want this to shift because that's power changing from their hands into somebody else's. That's how I view it anyway. So back to the point, he's saying that this person who helped in this absurd, like incompetent level, what, again, I argue was a cover up of information, was somebody who also was tied to October 7th, who was involved with some of the claims that were now proven to be false from October 7th. I find that almost impossible to believe unless, there's more to this.
Actually, yeah, this is in the front page of like the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle. And he's actually pictured, he's standing next to a guy named Chen Kugel, who is an Israeli and a source of a lot of these dubious claims about beheaded babies. And Goldschmidt's standing right next to him. I guess he volunteered and went over there to help. And again,
He is a dual citizen.
He is a dual citizen. Yeah, that's correct.
And he's the medical examiner who did at best an incomplete job with the autopsy or of the report anyway of Crooks.
Yeah, that's a hell of a 9 or 10 month run for his career to go from, responding to October 7th to autopsying Crooks. And yeah, again, I'm not necessarily suggesting anything, but because he's such a key player, we do need to know.
And he is not the medical examiner that victims, dead people in Butler Township, Pennsylvania would normally go to.
Good question.
No, not at all. I mean, again, the excuse was that they had more advanced facilities, but then they do this kind of run-of-the-mill autopsy and toxicology.
So the fireman who was killed at...
So in case you're missing the point, because this is just quick, the real point was what he was highlighting there. Watch the full interview if you want to get into the deeper part. I'll finish this clip. But that obviously they made a random argument of why this one person had to go to this special location, and then nothing special happened. And on top of that, we've already discussed, by the way, as somebody in the chat says, so everything already covered by Ryan and a few others is now going into the alternative media through Carlson. Yeah, I agree, and we should question why that is. But as always, like I said, we should also keep open in our minds that maybe this is a genuine transition. I don't really believe that. But it's objective to do that. It's objective to be able to consider that it may actually be Tucker seeing this for the first time and changing where he stands. Or maybe we were always wrong about what he's been thinking and saying. You know my opinions. It's just important to be objective and to consider those things. But back to the point, that this is, yes, we've talked about this. And yes, it's obvious that this is something bigger. What was the last point than what we...
No, not at all. I mean, again, the excuse was that they had more advanced facilities, but then they do this kind of run-of-the-mill autopsy and toxicology.
So the fireman who was killed at Butler went to the local medical examiner.
Right, that's what I was thinking. So the fireman, right? So the person that, you argue that this is somebody that you're going to send to the normal one, and you take the criminal and you give him the extra. It doesn't line up for me.
But Thomas Crooks went to this medical examiner, the dual citizen.
Well, Corey Comparatori was taken to Allegheny County as well. But they've got contradictory excuses where they say they took Corey there to avoid the press attention at the Butler office. And then Thomas was supposedly sent there for the more advanced facilities. So
the facilities that allowed him to be cremated with the fragments still in him. And
right, with the evidence still in him, yes. But in regard to the rest of them, not necessarily the firemen, in case I said that confusingly, the idea that we're talking about a deviation between the people that were even Americans and everybody else, and then Thomas Matthew Crooks sent to this location where they claim it's necessary for extra, special expertise, especially coming from what I was just going through. That's something that stands out to me. And then obviously they didn't do that. And it's more of a hiding of the evidence. This isn't even really about that in this point. It's about this larger idea that we can somehow have this connection back to somebody else who was involved with a major lie that has still spun through all of this. I don't even know how that can be possible. Like the idea that he would end up in that location. Why? After he was over there. Why? It doesn't make any sense unless there's something more. And I don't know what that would be. We could obviously fill in those blanks with what might be likely, that this is some larger cover-up that spans across, look, with Trump and the idea of him being shot, what that did was obvious. The idea of the other alleged assassinations, all of these have been at least discussed and connect back to Israel. The idea of Charlie Kirk. We can't really decouple these things. This is all in the same lens. It's all in the same kind of larger conversation. And so to consider that there might have been an overlap, it seems obvious. But then to find one like that, I just think that's astounding. And this is why it's being discussed. Especially if you think Tucker is not genuine, it's because these things have to be let out. They know we see this. I just find that to be interesting. I'm glad to see it.
list the testing of his.
Yeah. Avoid the press attention at the Butler office, and then
The facilities that cremated
different
allowed him
stories.
to be cremated with the fragments still in him, and didn't list the testing of his hair. Okay. That's really, really interesting. He has not spoken to you, this medical examiner?
No, he hasn't. He did testify at an open hearing where Clay Higgins pressed him. Clay Higgins, say what you will about him, but I think he's been pretty good on this story. He's the only guy in government who's emphasized Aaron Zalapone's heroics, and Higgins is trying to press Goldschmidt about, like, how could you possibly say that Zalapone didn't hit anything, and Goldschmidt just insisted that the Secret Service was the only person who shot Crooks that day.
So the real point for bringing this up for me is how in the world you can believe that these people of either side, really, but in this case, the Trump administration, are on your side, are fighting for you, care about what you care about, and then will go and make such a huge deal, use this event. Even if you think it's real, that makes it even more crazy, and then do nothing about any of this. Now, look, you could argue that Matthew Crooks was Matthew Crooks was the person involved, but it's obvious there was more than just that. It's obvious there's information that's being withheld for 1,000 reasons, and that nothing happens. Just like they don't go after anybody they say allegedly stole information, Social Security information, or, for Minnesota fraud, or Epstein files, or any number of other things. It's just one after another. And yes, it's the same point, but it's relevant. It's relevant every single day, because these people are not doing anything to fight for you. Either side, by the way. Here is Ken Silva's account. I'll include that so you guys can follow him. Here's the entire interview. Now, I'll include the different stuff we put out about this on the 14th. This is July 14th, 2024, titled Trump's Assassination Attempt. Let's review the facts. I think it's, at that moment, it seems very clear that there's stuff to be doubted. I don't even want to get drawn into it for how many obvious things, not least of which is the fact that you can quite literally prove that his ear was not hit. He didn't get plastic surgery. There's no obvious, everything that's come out by every expert I've ever heard, even a bullet from either of the guns they want to pretend going even close to his ear would have left burn marks. It would have left, it's just, and they must have known this, at least looking back, they must know that any expert's like, yeah, we know you're lying. It's astounding. It just keeps happening. Here is our follow-up on the 15th. We must question, this was Derek's article following up on the 15th. We must question the attempted assassination of Trump. We have the one on the 16th. Trump assassination attempt narrative continues to unravel as Israel intensifies Palestine genocide. And then this one, I think, was really the important one where it was it really did make it clear. July 18th, evidence mounts showing official story on Trump shooting is false. Simple. And it's just about basic understanding of what they claim versus what actually happened, or whether you decide to lean into one argument or the other because you have a side, which is what always comes down to. Now, I'll include this, we briefly pointed to, but it's interesting to follow up on this, seeing as how the Judicial Watch came out with this on the 8th of June, 2026, yesterday, and says FBI records reveal witness accounts that SWAT officer recovered remote device from Butler's shooter's pocket. Within this was an argument that Crooks was in contact with the FBI before this all took place. Now, this is what it says now, and you can decide for yourself what this all adds up to. Here's the actual post that's still there of this highly redacted document that claims that he was discussing this with the FBI. And it says, the initial version of this release published June 5th stated that the heavily redacted records showed email communications between Thomas Crooks and a Butler County Sheriff's Office deputy, then reported to the FBI after further review of additional information that had been hidden by the FBI. All right, so that's their effort to hide that through it. The point, though, is that it says Judicial Watch has updated the press release. Now, that just seems confusing the way it's even written, but if you look into it, it seems that Judicial Watch is essentially not redacting. I just lost a word. So funny your mind works. Pulling back their claim. There's the term for it. You all know. I just said redacted, and it somehow just slipped my mind. Damn it. But so they are arguably saying that's incorrect now, and everyone has pushed back. But I don't know how I feel about this. The document is there, and so I find it interesting that you get this pressure, and they're forced to sort of walk back a claim that might make this all line up. And historically is exactly what you'd expect with the FBI. So you can decide for yourself. Retracted. Thank you. I don't know what redacted, just couldn't get it out of my head. All right. So moving beyond that, though, I find that to be important and interesting, but I mean, I guess the point it'll become more and more obvious and clear as they continue to do nothing to follow up with what are valid criticisms and information that's never been resolved. You know, let me think about Charlie Kirk in the same way. I mean, we're just going to pretend like that ever got resolved. They just shoved everything out of the way, buried everything, covered over. It's like Lahaina in the same way, just bulldoze over and cover it with that weird nano stuff. You know, it's like that's everything we're dealing with. And that doesn't mean that what you thought was absolutely the truth. Maybe not. But we can see a cover up, guys, sometimes literally. But before we get into a point about USS Liberty, which I do want to highlight, I just want to include one more point like this that relates both to this, what we just talked about, as well as what we're going to come to in regard to censorship and, you know, AI and Israel and this effort to sort of control the narrative. Part of this is this partisan game. And, you know, I point to this frequently because I think it's important to highlight that there are people out there who are desperately trying to keep you lost in this narrative and that are, usually incorrect, and somehow they continue to grow. And I think this is a construct. It is this very controlled platform and everything else. Mawin Rabbani just makes a simple point about Gad Saad, or however you pronounce this person's name, a admitted Mossad agent, this guy here, and what they do every single day. And there's a lot of people that are starting to really call this out, like the manipulative nature of people like Benny Johnson, who's been caught as a plagiarizer and a number of weird things, and ultimately is continually posting, just personal human photos of his kids and all this different stuff. And I don't find it to be genuine, but that's a personal point. In this case, I'm talking about Johnson or Jones or Gad Saad or Elon Musk or Eric Dowd, any one of them posting things that are like in the moment, either they don't care to look or they know are false. And even when it gets exposed as false, even by Twitter, it doesn't change the momentum and the growth and the millions of views and the fact that it's promoted again later next week. So he says, since I began monitoring Elon Musk's pet demagogue, is what he's calling this guy, not a day has gone by without him posting at least one fabrication. You could do the same thing, and I challenge you to do it, guys. Get any one of these names I just listed off, any of them. And I'll show you, I think, at least one example as it pertains to Iran in later, but it happens every day. And I'm not even going to say that I think it's all intercoordinated. I think there's just a guiding force that many of them just bow to, whatever you think that is. And that may just be influence and money. I don't know. But it says in the below, Gad Saad, or Gadsaad, I guess that's how you pronounce it. I haven't heard someone say different, claims to be reposting a video of a Muslim man. And in fact, guys, I have seen this go around before, shared by people like James Woods, for example, of an immigrant man urinating on pork products in a Dutch supermarket. I've seen Elon Musk share this exact conversation. We've seen this, guys. If you do this long enough, you see these kind of similarly circulating arguments. The same memes that we see of the same faces, same kind of thing. It becomes a meme in and of itself, right? So in case you missed the point already, it's false. Now it says in the video is in fact, and you can easily verify. In fact, he gives you the Reuters article. You can check for yourself that goes before this ever was discussed, from 2023 prank video back to a Dutch creator named Danny Derricks. Stage name, Berchuat. Derricks is neither a Muslim nor an immigrant. He did not urinate, and the claims made about the video have been debunked by multiple news organizations and indeed by the person who did it himself. Even the word debunked, it rubs you the wrong way, and I get it. But just recognize that this is not by Snopes or something. This is individual. The reality is you can look for yourself, and you can prove to yourself it's not what they're claiming. That should matter to you. It says, I've included the link to a Reuters article about the video. You can read it down below. It says either side has yet to master the most basic research skills, or he's an exceptionally gullible conspiracy theorist, or, which I are leaning towards, he's knowingly posting fabrications on a daily basis. At least one of these statements must be true. His latest book would lead one to conclude, all three are valid interpretations. Saad, who has a unique understanding of Islam and Muslims because he lived in Lebanon until the ripe old age of 10, uses this video to bolster his oft-repeated absurdity that there is no and can be no variation in Islam or distinctions within the faith, which is just not only disgusting, incorrect, and bigoted, it's also incorrect. Trap myself. It's just the idea that there's, it's the same thing people argued about Christians forever. It's the same thing people make about Jewish converts. It's not true. There's any number of people, from those that just get born into a family with the Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, background and then see themselves that way, but don't really practice it, to the people that go out there and commit crimes based on the idea that they think they're fulfilling their God's will. That's an extreme scale. Okay. And there's any number of people within all of that. And it's just obvious. And I think they're tricking people in the low-hanging fruit, lowest common denominator kind of situation. He says, Inside's fantasy world, ISIS is the only authentic version of Islam. More importantly, unless Israel's genocidal apartheid rape regime continues to enjoy unconditional support, the West will be overrun by Islam. Western civilization will collapse and everyone dies. And again, the point is, he shared this. He's practicing Islam, immigrant pisses on pork in Europe, whatever this random, another one of these pseudo-prophet fake accounts, or just, dishonest rather. It's not true. Creator of this account says it was a prank and he's not Muslim and he didn't piss on, whatever. The point, though, is this happens every day, all the time, constantly. Now, here is a kind of an overlapping point from, the fake MAGA, which is what I would call it, not MAGA, because these people didn't believe what they framed as MAGA in the first place. I still find that incredibly simple. They sold the world on all these ideals about what MAGA represented, and now they're not doing those things. Even if you disagree with those things, not even they're doing them. So they're not MAGA. They are people pretending to be what the MAGA people wanted. And now even the MAGA people are pissed at them. Now, yes, there's an overlap. There's an in-between that doesn't see it, but I just still think that's very simple. But he says, Hegseth, the religious Zionist, fake American, not, whatever you want to call it, the person who's not fighting for American interests while pretending that he's there fighting wars for our freedom. America faces real threats from foreign adversaries, terrorists, cyber actors, hostile intelligence services, and the very Section 702 that he swore he would stop with the rest of their team, he says, remains one of our nation's most effective tools for identifying and disrupting those threats before they reach our shores. He says the bipartisan Senate reauthorization strengthens both security. They were saying opposite things right before this. But he goes on to say, Democrats are choosing to halt action on reauthorization, undermining national security. The main point is always, even Twitter comes out and goes, no, man, it was both Democrats and Republicans. And so all you do is choose to focus on the Democrats because you're clearly creating a war. You're creating a division war within the country that almost doesn't even exist anymore. I believe that. Either way, both Democrats and Republicans were voting to stop this because I think it's just about opportunism and getting interest, basically that many of these people within this saw an opportunity to get people to believe they fought for them. I'm jaded. You know that. Either way, the point comes down to that it's not the truth. He's lying about that. So certain people, even I would argue honest people, want to pretend that it's only Democrats who are trying to stop the thing who they just told you they would stop no matter what, because that's confusing. But he goes, MAGA should, soon as they got back into power, again, the fake ones in the government, went from the evil deep state is interfering in our politics to we demand that the NSA and CIA have the right to spy on American citizens without warrants. He says, Pete Hegg says, give us the power or the terrorists will kill you. You just got to laugh at how stupid this all is. And I truly think most people see it. Now, in case you're, I couldn't even think of something stupid enough to make this not stupid. This is something we should all laugh at. And the point to include is just to go, wow, they're going to save us with their meritocracy by making sure John Rich takes a place in our government. Not somebody who, it doesn't have to be a government person or some swamp dweller, but there's tons of people for this special envoy for American landowners that, actually know what they're talking about. Now, you guys all fight up and down about why John Rich knows everything. He is a commentator who is influential because he's wealthy and he has a music career. That doesn't make him aware of all the things or insightful about these things. I've watched these people engage with this stuff. These people are political investors. That's simply what we're talking about. Now, either way, the point is, you can even argue John Rich knows what he's talking about when it comes to land. Are you going to try to convince me that he's the best person for a job about American landowners? Or is he going to side with what Trump wants, even if it's not the best for American landowners? Don't even pretend you're going to answer. The idea is clear. These people are siding with the team and will attack you if you go against the team. They'll even tell you Massey's a bad person for counter-signaling the team, even though Massey's doing what they told you they wanted in the first place. So understand, this person, like all the rest, is a yes man, whether they tell themselves that or not. And they will continue to do what the team wants, including letting China come in and buy land, even though they told you that wouldn't happen, or including, down the list. Mark my words. But either way, the point is this is not a representation of what it would look like to do, any of the things they promised, let alone a meritocracy. Now, last point on the team, which is embarrassing in a lot of different ways. Luna comes out and makes an argument about whistleblowers. And says, my task force will be meeting with the White House to discuss providing whistleblowers. And before I even read further, just in case you don't know, whistleblowers are people who inform, or an organization who informs or engages in about organizations engaging in illicit activity. So crimes. Okay. My task force will be meeting with the White House to discuss providing whistleblowers with permanent immunity protections so they can safely disclose the truth about the programs of the government in aliens. UAP phenomenon. Oh, got it. So what's the crime that they're exposing? Guys, it's not only that they're trying to play everybody, but it's like they've got the dumb people in front trying to play you, and they're too dumb to realize that they're not going to trick anybody. You have to understand, like, that's not a whistleblower. And on top of that, these are the people that have been attacking every whistleblower of any standing that we've seen since I've been doing this, from Julian Assange to, all you listed. And those are whistleblowers who, without question, revealed crimes of the government, but with national security, though. So even though we make laws that say that if they reveal a crime, they're not going to be, you're still going to put them in jail, right? National security. But if we want to convince you that this story we want to shove down your throat, well, no, but while we're drowning in our own lies is the truth, we're going to pretend like we need to remove whistleblower or, blocks from them revealing this national security. Why would that even be a whistleblower? This is a game to make you think that they're trying to allow this information and fight for you to see whatever they're going to probably claim the deep state's been hiding from you. I mean, this is just sad. Not only is it not something that needs to be given freedom to expose, unless the government is telling them it's a crime to expose things that you need to know about, not crimes, but it just simply is them covering up information. It just becomes this stupid game where they frame themselves as the ones fighting for your freedom, fighting for your information, while all they're really doing is creating a false construct. And I don't even know if Luna is aware of that. Frankly, I think she doesn't care, but either way, this is what they're going to do for you. So don't dare go out there and expose the fact that, I don't know, they're killing civilians or illegally fighting against Iran, because they'll put you in prison, even if you're whistleblowing. But if you want to come out and sell the narrative about whatever Blue Beam project they're going to do next, she'll protect you. Don't worry. Now, on USS Liberty. We've talked about this a while ago. I just grabbed one of them. This is from 2019, or have for a while, like a lot of us have. I mean, it's an important topic. The important thing to understand about USS Liberty in the conversation is that it's so very obvious. When I talked about this the other day about like this mass delusion that we deal with, that doesn't mean everybody, but it certainly means a grouping, a part of the population that is convinced, right? That it's sort of like when we talk about like geoengineering, and you still have people that you would otherwise think know what's going on, who kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, here we go, black helicopters. It's like, guys, this is a very real, admitted and ongoing conversation, but something in them is a block, who just like grew up with the idea that that's a fake story or whatever. It's the same thing that exists around certain topics like the Holocaust or whatever else. Whatever your opinions on it, we all know that there's a weird block around even being able to get into details. And that usually indicates deception, some kind of dishonesty. But the point here is that we have all of the information. We have survivors that are still alive. We've got the information from the people that were there. And all you get are people today that just lied to everybody. Now, I don't know whether they are wrong and don't know it, or they're choosing to deceive you. I can't know for sure. But what's obvious is that you've got all of our government and all of these people that are clearly on a certain side, like Crenshaw or, all the rest of them, or Tom Cotton, who just on the surface will take sides that are anti-American while claiming they're fighting for you, are coming out and chastising Massey for how dare you for lying about, when everyone is on his side that was there. It's just, what that shows you is that we're in a really bad place in this country, where our government across the board, left and right, and this is what people are starting to see, are not fighting for American interests. You take that for whatever you think that means. Meanwhile, we're starting to see that Israel's controlling people in this government. I'm sure you can connect those two things and recognize that you have the government left and right maintaining the solution. Well, people like Massey, for however you want to read that, I hope it's honest. Everybody else in this country are coming to terms with the reality of that. So take it forward like a year, and let's say that it just keeps going. Where does that go? If every American starts to go, we see it, and all of the government just keeps standing their ground, it goes, well, you're wrong. What happens? I want you to think about that as we're going through this. What happens? If we don't do anything about it, nothing happens. I'm not advocating for violence, but we have to understand that there is a line that needs to be crossed. And I don't mean like in an illegal way. I just mean that we have to realize that if we just continue to hope that the system enforces on the system, it's not going to happen. They're hoping that we sit back and go, well, we have to trust in the system. And it's never going to happen, in my opinion. And I think we've proven that. So at the very least, we need to start, getting out in the streets, if you will, or doing something beyond just pointing to it, which is what often people claim we're doing, but we're not. I do plenty of stuff outside of just talking about this show. I do stuff all the time. I just don't always broadcast it, especially since I don't want my personal location details always out there. But we do need to start doing something, because they will stand their ground, and it will only continue to get worse and worse by outside powers continuing to buy off the people who just want more time. So this was a show we did in 2019. Top British commander contradicts U.S. says no Iranian threat and USS Liberty false flag parallels. It's a good show. But let's start with this, and I'm going to play Thomas Massey's clip. But we got a lot of these people, these, kind of fake independent types like Cernovich here, who says, even if you don't see the attack as deliberate, he goes, I've read as much as anyone and I remain unsure. Well, you're an idiot then. It is a disgrace how Republicans in Congress have treated the survivors. They deserve to be heard. Oh, very, very brave of you to take that fence-sitting stance. Right? Yeah. Well, we don't know, and we shouldn't question it. The idea is, at the end of the day, it's obvious. It's very clear. All the evidence points to one very clear thing. Everyone, I'll show you the admiral speaking about it and how he thinks it was deliberate. You just can't hide from this stuff. And this is how you argue it, right? And I just simply said, you mean aside from the numerous testimonies of numerous survivors, you partisan fraud? So before we get to these other clips, let's listen to what Massey had to say.
Now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes.
I request unanimous consent to revise and extend my marks and to introduce other material into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it's my great honor, maybe one of the biggest honors of my lifetime, to stand here on the floor and do something that's 59 years overdue, to recognize the survivors and those who gave their lives on the USS Liberty 59 years ago today, when they were viciously attacked by IDF jets and also after that by torpedo boats. I'm going to tell you a little bit of their story. And there, by the way, there's at least a dozen of them here today with us. I just met with them in my office, and they related this story to me. It was a clear day. The USS Liberty was one of the most technologically sophisticated ships in the Navy, but it was virtually unarmed, and it was sent to observe the six-day war going on in the Middle East between Israel and its neighbors. It arrived on June 7th. And the weather was clear. The planes came out to meet them, to investigate. And then on the next day, on June 8th, they started the day. The visibility was unlimited. The American flag was flying proudly on the USS Liberty. More planes came from Israel to surveil the boat, the ship. And they thought they were in good shape. But what happened next surprised them all. French Mirage jets showed up, and for 25 minutes, strafed and attacked the USS Liberty. They shot rockets. They shot 30-millimeter cannons into the hull and into the ship. They even dropped napalm on the bridge of the ship. This was an effort to kill everybody on board. There was no intention of taking prisoners. After the 25 grueling minutes of attack on this virtually unarmed ship, and they thought things were over and they could recover, the torpedo boats showed up, 3 torpedo boats. They launched 4 torpedoes. One of them hit the hull of the USS Liberty and killed 25 people instantly. It blew a 40-foot by 40-foot hole in the side of this ship. They were intent on sinking it.
Meanwhile, American flags are waving the entire time.
But they were also intent on not having a single survivor. According to eyewitness accounts, the Israelis machine gunned the lifeboats that they put down. They machine gunned.
And guys, please, if you have not heard this story, you can check this stuff for yourself. It's actually really easy to verify almost everything he's saying. It's just that people listen to the liars in Congress and the liars in false independent media.
The firefighters who were on the deck, they were bringing the wounded and the dead to the mess hall to triage them. They had one doctor who was trying to help them all, put a few stitches in. It was harrowing, and it's amazing. If not for that crew, that boat would have sunk that day. But it still wasn't over. Helicopters showed up, combat helicopters. And the USS Liberty, even though their signals were being jammed by the Israelis, got a signal out. And there were ships that tried to respond. The USS Saratoga, the USS America sent planes. Both of them sent planes to help the USS Liberty. And something happened that's never happened before. A ship under attack, the planes were recalled. This has never happened before. And they sat there for 17 hours.
Think about that.
34 dead, 174 wounded.
How in the world could you possibly try to explain this as anything other than exactly what it looks like? Calling off the rescue, how long they sat there. Come on. I mean, these are just the surface. I mean, there's so much. We're going to play at least a couple of examples, as we played in the past, of people that Massey talked to, but people that have been speaking out for years, who were there, who lived through it, and have their story to tell, who are American veterans, who are ignored entirely like they don't exist by all the people who are outraged by Massey speaking out about the truth.
Out of 294 crew members, that's over 70% casualty rate, unheard of. The Israelis were intent on leaving no survivor. And what about our own military? Why did they not send anybody for 17 hours to help these men? So what really happened? You know, the official reports say that it was a case of mistaken identity. But if you listen to Dean Rusk, former Secretary of State, Richard Helms, CIA Director, Bobby Ray Inman, head of the NSA, Captain Ward Boston, who was the chief counsel of the Court of Inquiry. If you listen to Admiral Moore, who served in Pearl Harbor, Midway, commanded both the Atlantic and Pacific Fleet, and was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, none of these distinguished men think this was an accident.
And that's important because what you get from the people like Ben Shapiro and the rest is, well, the U.S. military and the Israeli government said that was an accident. Just like we're hearing today. Oh, well, good is both the groups involved with the cover-up admit that there's no cover-up. That makes sense. But either way, the point is that you're telling us that because they said that when everybody else, all the information you're highlighting, and they just lie, and Ben goes, well, they said so. You got to laugh at the stupidity of that from a so-called journalist. Like, the first thing you do is question the authority, the power structure, the ones involved, of course. But I don't even need to explain why Ben has a blind spot here, guys. And I'm not talking about his religion if you think that's what I mean.
The Court of Inquiry, if you listen to Admiral Moore, who served in Pearl Harbor, Midway, commanded both the Atlantic and Pacific Fleet, and was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, none of these distinguished men think this was an accident. They think it was intentional murder by the country of Israel, either as a false flag operation or because they simply didn't want anybody observing what they were doing that day.
There's a good answer for in the chat for somebody asking what was the motive, right? I mean, but again, that's a good question, but it's not necessary to acknowledge that it happened. That's usually how these things will go, is they go, well, why would they do that? Well, that's always a good question, but not knowing that does not suddenly make the point irrelevant or that it happened irrelevant, right? It happened, and that's an easily provable fact. Why, like he said, I argue it's most likely a cover-up about not wanting this information to get out, but maybe there's a series of events that led to this. Maybe there was another false flag with the attempt to frame somebody else. That's the most likely, honestly, when it comes down to what we're dealing with today. But regardless, it is clearly something that happened. And as we'll get to, the people that were there saw it for themselves.
Well, I've got a call to action for everybody here. Honor these individuals. Quit ignoring that they exist. Go to their website, ussliberty.org. Support them. And while they're still alive, they need closure. Let's give them closure. Let's have an investigation. Let's pass a resolution honoring them. It's long overdue. And then they can have their justice. With that, I yield back. And I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a declaration of Ward Boston declaring that the only official court of inquiry was invalid.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes.
No. What we're talking about is, everybody's pushing back on him. I mean, it just seems like across the board or ignoring it entirely. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the most likely reality here is it's been an ongoing effort for Israel to infiltrate and manipulate foreign countries. You can still stand back and argue you think the United States controls Israel. I'm open to that very real possibility. My opinion goes the other direction, but as I've said every time, despite people out there constantly going, you think Israel controls the world. Nope, didn't say that, but I do think it's obvious that they have large influence over this country. But I can see a world in which it's an inversion of the reality to hide that fact. I've said that many times, but my opinion is the same. But what's obvious is that we've seen this effort, like in Gaza or in Syria or in Lebanon or anywhere else, where it's about their desire for this, coveting that territory. And in this case, you can see a world in which there was an effort to get the United States to you could even argue going back that far that it wasn't as obvious, or rather as all-encompassing, however you look at it today, that there were still people that push back against that kind of, the U.S. getting drawn into a war for a foreign power. And so the argument might have been to blame it on Egypt and to make people then get drawn into a war, the U.S. rather, into the war that was in the interest of Israel. Let's not forget, a regime change took place that benefited Israel. Sisi, it's not a secret to see how this has played out. Why and how it happened then is up for you to decide. But it's just important to see it's not only obvious with the information, but also the fact that it's been covered up by our entire. Why is Massey the first person to ever really stand up and do that? That speaks for itself. I think that's very obvious. Now, here is the Sacrificing Liberty documentary, that you can watch for yourself. Very well done. It's incredible how obvious this topic is. Here is James Lee pointing to a good clip. Captain of the USS Liberty, in a speech given at Arlington National Cemetery, quote, "I do not believe it was a case of mistaken identity." And please, as always, do your due diligence. Make sure it's real. It is. Audio, video, it's a legitimate video, but check it for yourself like you should. He's responding to Jeremy Boring, saying, "No, the story was not overlooked or buried. Israel immediately informed us the attack happened. There were numerous investigations. The captain of the USS Liberty was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Israel apologized and paid reparations." The same captain right over there that just said it was not, he doesn't think it was an accident. And yes, there's more to his speech. There's plenty more you could listen to, but the statement is the statement. It doesn't change based on, he'll go on to argue all the other points, whatever else, but he said himself, he does not think it was an accident. He says the truth is it's just not a big story. Think about saying that. It's a tragic story, and no doubt, but no, it isn't a big story. How, even if it was one American that got killed, how is that not a big story? The idea of an ally accidentally bombing a fort, even if that's what you think happened, that's a huge story. 34 Americans died on the USS Liberty. 11,363 Americans died in the jungles of Vietnam. So now it's based on so let's take that game and apply it to Gaza. How about that? Oops, don't like when you do that. Oh no, it's about the bomb. It's always some kind of an abstract shifting of information to make it look the way they want it to. The bottom line, this is a person like all the rest trying to make this out to be something that it's not, who either is that bad at their job and doesn't understand the basic information you can find directly from key source material, or he's a liar, or a mix of the two. You can decide. Here's the very captain he was citing.
For many years, I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the State of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened and why it came about that the Liberty was attacked 30 years ago today.
Here is a Haaretz article. And this is Israeli newspaper. Yes, we did it on purpose. MAGA Ziobot. No, Israel did it by mistake. Followed by 10 paragraphs of Hasbara BS. I've shown this article in the past. I believe it was actually in the link we just pointed to. He says, but sir, and it's an American ship. Never mind. Hit her when Israel attacked the USS Liberty. And this is always what seems to happen with Haaretz. Like here's a good example. I should just grab that other one too, since we're looking this up. But I've made this one in the past, or plenty of other examples like this. One of these ongoing blood libel conversations is, well, the Jews poisoned the wells and act like that's some kind of a large, point is the argument goes back to the Zionists who quite literally poisoned the wells of the Palestinians. Here's Haaretz highlighting that. Their own documents from Israel show that they, the quote, placed the material in the wells. Docs point to Israeli army's biological warfare. So it's not a false story then. But if you want to arbitrarily make that an argument about somebody today without evidence, that would be, but this is not. So arguing it's based on a lie is incorrect. Now it's the same thing, and I would just grab it really quickly. I guess I can't highlight it right there. Let's see if that's in here. Nope. And this, of course, Insurrection Barbie. Just Thomas Massey calls for an investigation to USS Liberty. Someone tell him there's been 11. These are the fake MAGA people we're talking about. So let me grab this for you. But sir, and again, I know I've seen it before. It's right there. Never mind, hit her when Israel attacked the USS Liberty. The Americans have findings that show our pilots were aware the ship was American. Think about having this here. From Haaretz, the leading Israeli newspaper, citing Israeli documentation about information showing they knew this, and that they, like, you can go through and read this, and it will be not, let's kind of figure out this by unfinished information, but that we know this, and here's the data, here's the document, and yet all of our corporate media, all the fake independent, all of the government act like we don't know this. That is a mass delusion or a mass cover-up. It's a little bit of both is what I'm really saying. That there's enough people that actually have kind of gone along with the cover-up for so long that people just act like that's the truth. I bet you half of Congress doesn't even know that this is the truth, and that's not some kind of a pass on them. It's because they've allowed their own incompetence and stupidity to actually guide them while other outside forces seem to dictate what they do. But at the end of the day, guys, that's insane. I'll include both these for you. And I could do tons of other examples. These are just these classic stories they want to pretend are fake and, dishonest when it's very clearly documented. And then you can show the documents and somehow you're still racist. I mean, it's always how this goes. Here, James Lee highlights another example of If Americans Knew, which you should follow. It has to do with this very topic, the larger discussion of Israel and what's going on in this country. Congressman Thomas Massey meets with some of the survivors of the USS Liberty. That should matter, shouldn't it? There's people alive that watched it happen who want to testify that they know it wasn't an accident, but apparently not to the ones that always pretend they care about veterans and care about America.
The torpedo boats that he testified machine gunned the rafts.
In the life raft. We had passed the word to prepare to abandon ship, and so we dropped some serviceable life rafts off over the side, and they floated back astern of us, and torpedo boats approached and did Liberty machine gun them.
Yeah. One other thing too, the torpedo boats circled us for an hour and a half, and on the stern we had L-E-B-E-R-T-Y in English, right on the stern of the ship. So how can you expect it to be an Egyptian ship when you can see the English word liberty?
This gentleman was the signalman. He's the one that ran the American flag, 2 different American flags up on the bridge.
Yeah, so there was
he personally 6 a.m. or tell me about
first we had the regular steaming ensign, which we always flew when we were inside of land, and the air attack knocked one of them down. So Frank Brown, the quartermaster, and I ran up to the signal bridge and hauled up our largest flag, holiday colors, and that was flying during the torpedo attack.
How large is it, Joe?
9 by 13 feet.
So it's easily recognizable.
Yes.
And the first one was 5 by 8?
Yeah, 5 by 8, I think it is.
A little low, the audio, right? But easily identifiable is the point, guys. And this is Massey speaking to the survivors. How can you even how could you frame that as something that it's not? Think about that. From the people acting like they're fighting for liberty and American interests, and the vets, and the very people framing the other side is somehow it's neither of those sides. Left and right don't care about you. Whatever Massey fits into it, you can decide. But the point is, he's clearly speaking to people who saw it happen, who understand their views matter, don't they? And yet they get attacked for simply speaking out, as Lee says. It's absolutely treasonous that 97% of members of Congress believe a foreign country's account of the attack, and not the firsthand testimony of our own veterans. Think of how insane that is. He says, I appreciate the efforts, Thomas Massey, but at this point, we're not sovereign. You can take that for what you will. I've pointed to Joe Meters, by the way, who was on a freedom flotilla, who was arrested by Israel. So you can take this even one step further. You have a guy who was on the Liberty, Joe Meters. He was there. He watched it happen. He has spoken about how he knows it wasn't an accident. And then he goes on a freedom flotilla to bring food to starving Gazans. Now, this was before October 7th. This was 2018. And they seized the boat. People were injured. They seized him. They held him for 3 days, I think, or more. And not a word. The U.S. government never said a word. Everything about that was illegal. Doesn't matter. Here's Israel pretending to care about Americans on Memorial Day while all this is happening. It's just disgusting, isn't it? And people see it, guys. Americans see it. Republicans see it. Phil, whose account you should follow, he's a survivor of USS Liberty, says, thank you, Massey. You gave the dead of the USS Liberty a voice. You stood up for us when nobody had the courage. You're a beacon of hope and a movement in our country. I just can't even wrap my mind around how that hasn't happened until now. I think we all know why. Here is the same guy, Phil, speaking about the USS Liberty with James Lee. It's just a quick clip, about 30 seconds.
deliberately sent there. All the ships were going one way, and we were the only ones going that way. Eshkol and LBJ and their cronies together had a tight-fisted group that said, let's get this going. This attack was probably planned a year in advance to sink that ship and blame it on the Arab states.
Right. In this case, Egypt, but the Arab states. Same old thing we're dealing with today. Now, as always, question him. He could be wrong. He could be mistaken. He could be, I mean, anything. But his information over the years and everything about this is still backed up by the facts. His opinion stands since he was there. But, you know, just as always, question everything. But at the same point, question the people who have an interest in maintaining the status quo. Here's Dan Crenshaw, who says, I've always had respect for Massey. He was always, in my opinion, wrong about his approach, but he was, you know, and what is that? The approach that be consistent with what Republicans are asking for, or be consistent with the Constitution? What exactly is your issue, Dan? And that's not some kind of praise. You know my concern about politicians, but Massey has done both those things. Easy to point to. And it says, but he was standing on heartfelt principles and had intellectual backing. He's a nice guy, but comments like this make me question his authenticity. Comments like, I'm going to speak out about what happened on this day. That's all this says. The brave crew who died were wounded in an unprovoked attack by Israel. That's what he's taking issue with, the facts. And maybe Dan Crenshaw is too dumb to know he's wrong, or maybe he's dishonest. Maybe it's a little bit of both. He says the USS Liberty incident is a tragic one, but it's an incident with a clear conclusion. See, this is what they do. That's even not true. It's been wildly muddy the entire time, but the evidence is clear. He's lying. If one uses an objective analysis of the facts. Oh, I see. So if you look through the lens that we tell you to, right? The only objective facts are what we, Israel and the United States claim happened. That's what they're really trying to do there. It says, I thought Massey was capable of objective analysis. You think about him, what they're doing is trying to play on the dumb people in the room. They want you to be scared of your own intellect. They want you to think that, oh my gosh, this guy is actually incorrect. And so I'm supposed to side with them because they know better. And smart people don't do that. Smart people would go, well, I'm going to look for myself. I'm going to see whether he's being objective or he's being objective. And then when you look, sure enough, Dan's an idiot. Surprise, surprise. Perhaps he still is. That's just a coincidental continuation. Perhaps we are simply witnessing another example of the irresistible incentive to jump on the bandwagon of grifters that guarantee you a special kind of social media audience. Think about somebody like them doing that. The all flash, no substance Republican kind of team right now. And you have somebody who's been consistently standing up for the things that they actually wanted, and that's him leaning into the bandwagon. I mean, by the way, anyway, it's not, I don't like to get pulled into feeling like I'm defending a politician, but it just feels obvious to me. And guess what? It's still gathering ratings, it says. This is Twitter, by the way. This was already posted, and just like the other day, enough people get in there and lie about it, and it suddenly starts to get reevaluated. But it says, Crenshaw claims USS Liberty has no clear conclusion of mistaken identity. Disputed by plenty of people, by the way. Plenty of people. But so now it's going to be probably pulled away, how much you want to bet. But here's Massey's excellent response. These men deserve to be thanked and remembered. Which part of my post do you find objectionable? You can't come back. I mean, these guys are losing in every possible way. I mean, look, even if you want to look at the ratioed part, which I agree is small. It's just not ratioing somebody on Twitter should not ultimately matter in the real sense of what's happening. But it does have an insight into what people, at least on this platform, or at least what they want you to think is happening. And you consider all those things and what it means. And so in this case, Massey is at least being shown to us as the one, think of it either way. But 34,000 likes compared to 3.8 on his own post. What that's supposed to mean in this platform is that he got made to look like a fool, that his own followers agree more with Massey than with him. That's what it's supposed to mean. You can decide for yourself. Now, in the overlap of this, right now what you have is this aggressive push, like we're seeing from whatever you want to deal with. There are multi-layered parts of this. Clearly, there's a Zionist political organization. That's not some secret. It's not a racist point to make. They're existing and they point to themselves. So there is a Zionist organization that is controlling Israel. That's their own statement. That's what the Zionist state of Israel, so they as an entity, politically and otherwise, are on the surface, out there trying to influence opinions, paying, as we'll point to in a second, producers to manipulate American opinions, manipulating social media platforms to say what they think is what they want you to think, or you could argue what they think is correct. That should matter to everybody, even if they have the best of intentions, because what it means is they want to manipulate your opinion to align with theirs. That's not supposed to be what we agree with in this country. Now, of course, then you can open that up to the other government elements and everything else, but I think what's driving this more than anything is that. Not necessarily some Jewish alone agenda. Christian Zionists exist, atheist Zionists exist, and you have to understand that, because to try to make it about one religion doesn't even align with the facts of the conversation, by the way. But it does overlap. It does exist. But so my point in saying all that is you have this clear political agenda that's just stemmed right through Trump's administration, obviously, but the government really, who is trying to right now fight back what I argue is insurmountable. The awareness of what's actually happening around this conversation. But what they're going to do is try, obviously, they're not going to give up. So they're going to try to control you through AI. They're going to try to control you through social media influence. And I guess it might work for some people. I argue it's not working at all. But here's an example. Israeli AI expert. And this obviously speaks to a larger concerning point about just how these chatbots work. Maya Ackerman admits that Israel can move AI chatbots into alignment, that's her statement, so that the output doesn't, quote, honestly represent data, but instead shows us, quote, exactly what we want to see. Oh my God, bombshell. For some people it might be, but we've been making this argument from the show because it's obvious. You can see it if you're paying attention on these platforms. Elon Musk is doing this. And it's not, her point is it goes beyond one person or one platform, but that the Sam Altmans and Elon Musks and Peter Thiels are working together for a larger control of the grand narrative. That may sound crazy to people that aren't paying attention, but if you're even barely seeing what's happening, you're like, yes, obviously. They're all trying to do that, would be the obvious answer. But this speaks to something much larger when we're dealing with an ongoing genocide and groups who are surreptitiously trying to control policy of a foreign country.
AI is actively being trained and programmed to lie to you. Like, what's going on here?
Because over the past 2 years, the AI companies have been moving towards alignment. So instead of the algorithms sort of honestly representing what's in the data, we're finding that these chatbots and the text-to-image models are increasingly showing us exactly what the companies want us to see.
Now, that could be for their political interest. That could be because they want to make more money, or it could be because they have a philosophical or prophetic perception that aligns with something. I mean, any of those it's the same. For me, it's really realistically the same concern. But there's obviously more concerning elements of the, different directions of all that. But the ultimate point is that you have an entity trying to influence your opinion for their benefit. And your government, I argue, is a willing part of that, at the very least, is aware of that, or is just completely taken over by whatever this AI agenda is. But quickly for the podcast, the article on the screen says how Israel tried to use AI to covertly sway Americans about Gaza. That's June 5th, 2024. So let's go ahead and pretend it's not absolutely happening all the time about every topic we're dealing with that involves Israel.
Want us to see, okay? So it's becoming intentional, which means that instead of trying to control the whole world and trying to somehow manage what's happening in this big blob of Wikipedia and social media, we can go directly to the companies with clear technical and advocacy solutions. So for the first time, there is a path to correcting the digital world.
That's the American Jewish Council, I believe. So they're just making it clear. Of course, some people might go, oh, good, we can help stop climate change, or whatever broken perception you have on how manipulating people's opinions somehow works for the greater good. But it's what she's ultimately saying is sort of almost a positive. Right? Well, we have all these dangerously anti-Semitic people, or whatever the thing is from that council. That's what they generally are getting into, and highlighting that we can just go, hey, Palantir, Twitter, whatever else. I say Palantir from a larger element of it, the something above the platforms. Well, let's just say Twitter, TikTok, whatever else. We want you to lean this way, or even let's say the chatbots more specifically, Grok or whatever else. We want you to drive them in this direction. If anybody that's using it for an academic sense, like to see what Grok is and what it does, or unfortunately using it to dictate their research, which you shouldn't be doing, you see these things. You see that it's trying to nudge you in certain directions. Well, I would argue you do if you're trying to look for it. You might not see it if you're letting it dictate your research. But see, right now, we're Whitney and Derek and I and the rest of IMA, we were talking about this on the last discussion and flirting with the idea of putting out sort of a pledge. And it completely, in the last case you didn't see it. Actually, now that I'm realizing it, I still need to post that. That happened when I was in the midst of being in California and traveling for my dad. We did an IMA panel. Corbett hosted it. It was an interesting one about AI and different things, and I still need to post it. I'm remembering right now. But either way, the point is that we discussed that and got into these kind of the nuance of where it all is. And Brock and Corbett were ones discussing that they were using, in some cases, AI created or just ones they find online of images. I've talked about that too in regard to this copyright lawsuits, or just the idea that you end up using things that you find that end up being that and you're not even aware of that. But either way, the point is that I argue a difference when it comes to that. And sure, people may disagree. What I argued, what largely everyone agreed with in the conversation, was that if you're using Grok or AI or these different chatbots to research, to provide answers for you, even if you then ultimately go back and like double check them, it opens the window for them to manipulate the way that you see things. Now, I can see a benefit in going like, find this abstract thing that I'm not able to find, and then going out of your way to sort of find the actual thing and going right to that, not letting Grok feed you the information or whatever platform, what are they, OpenSea or Deep, whatever the ones are. But it's interesting, right? Because, anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. The point is that people can ultimately get manipulated in ways they don't even recognize by providing you what they say is the full picture and not giving you all of it, or giving you select portions of certain things. And so it's really important. So the pledge we're talking about is sort of putting something out saying, as the IMA, as a group, we collectively will pledge that we are not letting AI dictate our content. We're not saying, write this article for us. We're not saying, give me these paragraphs or break down these videos for me. That we're not doing any of that. At least that's what we all agreed to. I'm sure, we could question us all. We should. But it's important to see that that's something that's going to be happening. And we were discussing like a premium, like that people might start to put more of a premium on genuine content that's not manufactured by AI or influenced by it. But anyway, back to this point, what she's highlighting is the way that Grok and the rest of them can do that. And now we're seeing them admit that they can stand back behind the scenes and be like, let's make sure that anytime somebody asks this or asks these larger ideas, that we nudge them towards what we think or what we think is for the best. And so if you're out there searching, well, Grok has a mandate, if you will, or whatever the rest of them are. That seems to be the most prominent for most people, to kind of selectively keep you in these channels that you don't even realize are there. And you look back after a certain point and you don't even recognize your work anymore. And it's so obvious. And so this is happening right now. This comes, Israel's invested $6 million in to make ChatGPT more pro-Israel. Pretty sure they already know that Twitter and Grok is there. So I think that's just more of the same picture. Glenn Greenwald points out the planet's most fanatical Israel loyalists now own and control, or are about to, Paramount, CBS, TikTok, Warner Brothers, CNN, all acquired in the last 2 years by Netanyahu's close friend, Larry Ellison, right as public support for Israel in the United States and the West collapses. Now, Barry Weiss, it seems, was removed from the, what was it again? Whatever she was just on, 60 Minutes, I think, or whatever it was, which is interesting. And then they came out and made a statement about how they were manipulating content. Surprise, surprise. But now it looks like, arguably, by the New York Post, saying that she's going to oversee CNN. Isn't that interesting? The same CNN is supposed to be adversarial to Trump, but at the same time, they completely align when it comes to the view of Israel, when it matters for the system, as usual. But Glenn's point is just simply highlighting the consolidation of influence, whether you think it's Zionism, Israel, Jewish, Muslim, whatever. That's important to see. That is a controlling narrative point. And the AI is only going to make it worse. Glenn also points out the Israel government has said explicitly that they see social media control as their most important war. We've talked about this, especially in the United States, and will use a combination of censorship and buying up platforms and influencers like they did with TikTok and CBS to reprogram Americans. This comes from Nick Cleveland Stout. Israeli government has hired Daniel Rosenberg, the producer of Spike Lee's Inside Man, on a $900,000 contract to produce pro-Israel, not movies and but social media content to influence U.S. public opinion. Do you think for 1 second that's going to be stated as sponsored influence content or somehow framed as Israel paid for this? I think you'd be wrong. That's my opinion anyway. I think what it's supposed to be framed as, and I doubt this was even supposed to be acknowledged, was genuine media content of people that have opinions, but they're paying for it. I argue that's half of the current new media. Rosenberg's firm, Piros, is set to hire a director and hold casting for on-camera talent. Now, whether this comes out as some sort of project that's like framed as we paid for this movie we made, or something that's produced as sort of an, like you get this kind of report and then you never hear about it again. And then find out 10 years later that big thing you saw that was this big organic event turned out to be the thing they bought, they paid for. That happens. And it's happened a lot, in fact. But either way, know that this is happening. There's an agenda to influence your opinion very aggressively. And for reasons just like this, guys, we talked about this on the 3rd, the new National Defense Authorization Act further integrates the U.S. and Israeli militaries. Now, the one thing, there's been a lot of good coverage on this from even people that are in the, somewhat mainstream independent media. But my point, though, is that the one thing that gets failed, that is repeatedly failing, or rather that the people that are doing those reports are failing on, I would argue, is not highlighting that this is not some new event. It's already been happening. I don't need to do it again. The next show we did right here includes that information, but it shows you going back, and this one as well, years, even further, of the conflation of these two topics, right? Of arguing that IDF and the U.S. military are the same thing when it comes to the benefits and resources. Arguing into the 218th Congress already having an intelligence sort of blending bill that came out. Now you've got the Senate part of it, which we showed you already, and you've got the National Defense Authorization Act part of it, both of which are the same kind of thing. One's more intelligence focused, but these already exist. I just have to really stress that again, because even if these fail, if all 5 of the bills that are now getting focused on just fail, I hope they do, that doesn't stop the influence they already have. This is just, I think, one last effort, or even an effort to get us to think that it failed. Either way, it is clear that Americans are seeing that Israel's influencing policy. Ron Paul, the notorious Section 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act, has survived the first attempt to strike it down. That's on the 8th, yesterday. So there's been some attempts, I argue, faux attempts to stop it. It didn't work, so it's still there. The provision, which integrates the Israeli military into our own national security apparatus, will remain in the bill as it moves out of the House Armed Services Committee. Will Americans be forced to mortgage their sovereignty on behalf of a foreign country, one that cannot stop spying on us? It's so nice to see somebody like Ron Paul, this is not some fringe concept anymore. And I know you guys know that, but this is always for the group that's just, maybe just caught the show and is going like, wow, these are racist people or whatever. It's not fringe. And maybe you don't think that, but either way, these are things that are happening on the surface. From a high level political discussion, we're talking about the obvious nature of Section 224. So to somehow turn around and argue it's like racist or bigoted or whatever, it's such a disingenuous opinion. I don't know how anybody can actually argue that this is not exactly what we're pointing to. Unless you only hear Jewish person when we talk about Israel, which is probably what is happening in some people's minds. But yet then when we point to things Israel does as Jewish people doing something, not me, but others, that becomes racist. Even though you just argued that we were, it's just this circle of nonsense. The point is that what we're talking about is the Israeli government influencing what the military does in this country or controlling it. And literally what it says right there, and that should matter to everybody. Nick Cleveland Stout points to the Responsible Statecraft article entitled WAPO Op-Ed, of course, backs the Section 224, omits author's direct Israel stake. It's shocking. So WAPO, being a group that we're supposed to think is adversarial to the current administration, but is supporting their agenda. As usual, the Washington Post publishes an opinion piece defending Section 224, the integration of Israeli military tech, without disclosing the author is a founder of the 1948 Ventures, a venture capital firm that invests in Israel defense startups. Or that it's Netanyahu's plan that's literally written out as such. Can't make this up. Now, here's John Kirkow saying Israel sent hundreds of spies into the U.S. defense contractors to steal F-35 avionics. One of 1,000 examples we could make, but apparently this doesn't matter. But he's referencing this in the context of 224, saying, well, now that they have this 224, they won't need to do these things anymore. Simply showing you the group that's been stealing and manipulating and subterfuge and all the things they're doing now has just simply been written into the reality. How many times have we made that point? That what Ron Paul has made over the years, that the government will see. So we'll go, hey, stop spying on Americans or stop propagandizing Americans. That's the Smith-Mundt Act, right? Okay. And they go, well, we hear you. So you don't like that. Okay. So we'll do the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. What does that do? Well, it makes that legal. So there's no problem then, right? So it's not illegal anymore. So we can spy on you. Doesn't that solve the problem? Clearly, they, I'm trying to make it facetious. They know what we wanted. They know we don't want them to do that. So what they do is they make you think they're doing that, but what they do is put it into law. Same thing that's happening here. Even though it's kind of already happening, the idea is that they've been doing this forever, but now the government that's been stolen from is going to go, it's okay, we'll just fold you in because they're no longer your government.
We were developing the F-35. The state-of-the-art, most sophisticated, blah, blah, blah fighter jet, which nobody likes. The F-35, the Israelis were the first ones to come to us, and they said, we want this new F-35. And we said, okay, we'll give it to you first. We're going to call it the F-35I for Israel, and we're going to degrade the avionics just barely, just in case, God forbid, one of them gets shot down, and the Russians or the Chinese get it. They're not going to have our topmost secrets. The Israelis said, nope, not good enough. We want the F-35. As is, as you have it, we want the same one you have. In the meantime, at the same time, the Emiratis came to us and they said, we want this F-35. And we said, okay, we'll sell it to you. We're going to call it the F-35E for Emirates. And we're going to degrade the avionics just a little bit. So God forbid if, you're in a dogfight over Iran and one gets shot down, that the Chinese or the Russians don't get it. They said, fine, we'll take it. The Israelis sent out hundreds of spies all across America in our defense contractors to steal that 2% of the avionics that we wouldn't give them. Well, with the National Defense Authorization Act of 2027, they don't need the spies to steal it because we're just going to fork it over. Just hand it over to them. Here you go.
I just think that's insane. It speaks for itself. It shows you that even though they've been doing that, the government has been so degraded and so manipulated and so infiltrated that they're now just allowing it publicly. Now, we followed up, obviously, on this conversation from the 7th. The obvious Israeli infiltration of the U.S. government is now acceptable to acknowledge. That's the point. Not that we're okay with it, but the reality being that now, for whatever reason, the system is going, okay, we can talk about it. Whether because that's just too far gone, I think that's kind of probably the case. Whatever it is, and I just took the play on this classic image of Netanyahu because it's clearly all of it, which tends to box out people that might want to, there's so many people out there that would agree with almost everything we say if we frame it only about one side or the other. How confounding that is? If I just made this about how right now, Trump's the only one, certain people that would love to believe the Democrats are not the problem would flock to the content. But we're honest about it. As always, it's not one side or the other. Anyway, so in this case, here's Murray Rothbard. I'm not familiar, but he simply highlights this. I was seeing Gen X Girl's been talking about this a lot. It's very relevant. She's the first person I saw talk about it. Congress isn't just debating aid to Israel anymore. That's the old fight. The new fight is whether the U.S. quietly embeds Israel into our defense tech, intelligence sharing, weapons development, and military industrial supply chain. Now, this, like I said, I'm just including it because you can read the different bills. We've talked about all these. All of them are important, and you should try to stop these. But like I said, this is just an extension of what's already happening. But go through these so you can understand what we're talking about. But I do agree. The game is about trying to make it look like, remember when Netanyahu kept coming out, and he did again just recently, going, we don't want to take your aid anymore. We want to be self-sufficient. All they were doing was building up to this point to where they could argue that's what this amounted to where now we're going to stop giving them aid. Well, no, you're just going to put it under a different heading to where we don't get to vote on it. We don't get to see it. And you're going to get far more than they're getting now. That's what's been admitted by most everybody involved in this, other than those who are trying to lie to you about it. Here's Jesse Waters talking with JD Vance. I almost don't even know how to frame this, that you have Jesse Waters. I'm almost wondering whether this is sort of like a joke clip, where they're kind of framing this as the question that neither of them agree with. But either way, it's still on his show on Fox News. He brings this up with JD Vance and says, Israel was just caught spying on the Pentagon, the thing that Trump and the rest and everybody denies. The Levins of the world go, you're such a liar. Shapiro says, everyone's denied it. Don't you believe the governments that we used to call out? There's just such hacks. But that he brings it up and says that they were caught spying on Americans and asks whether or not that's okay. And they kind of just jokingly talk about it. Do you realize how insane that is? Watch for yourself. There's other points we want to get into, so we'll talk about both. But this will segue with Iran and these other conversations.
How concerned are you about Israel spying on the United States and freelancing in Lebanon?
See, the way they're smiling, I'm were they kind of acting like we all know that's not true? I kind of get the sense that's even what Fox does. And Jesse Waters, more than anybody, is that he has this smug indifference that he applies to things that he wants people to subconsciously ignore. Because you can't deny this. It's obvious. But that's, anyway, you get the point. So here's how he responds.
Well, look, I think obviously the Israelis and the Israelis in the United States, we have a lot of shared interests, but we also have some situations where our interests diverge. And I think where the president has been very clear here is that while Israel obviously has some objectives that it has, the United States' main objective in Iran is to ensure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. Okay. And we've actually, thanks to what's happened over the last few months, but really over the last year and a half, we've created the space necessary where the president...
Okay, wait, just to reset the table. Did he not just ask him about whether or not it's okay that Israel spies on Americans through the Pentagon? This is your answer? Well, we have different interests and, things are different and we open the space for the deal. How does that not get that's it? Why wouldn't he be like, well, let me explain why it's not what you think, or let me explain, like, they're just, it's almost like I said right in the beginning, that this is like by design imploding, that this is them, and through Israel's manipulation of them through this government, just the absolute collapse. How does that act? How is that the right response? To act like it's almost to pretend like he didn't even ask the question. Doesn't that then, in anybody with two brain cells rubbed together, open the door to, whoa, wait a minute. So you're not denying that, you're acknowledging that it's okay because you have different interests, that so Israel can spy on Americans? Apparently.
Believes, and I think that he's right, that we can get the long-term settlement to Iran's nuclear deal. Now, Israel may like that, they may not like that, but fundamentally, we think this is in the best interest of the United States of America. So we're going to keep on pursuing it because that's what the President of the United States was elected to do. That's what we have to do in order to properly serve the American people.
No, yeah. So you mean keep doing the thing that you swore you wouldn't do? Just a little clarification, but you lie. That's what they do. But still, we're at a point where the answer to his question is not even in there. It's just, well, we have a deal that we want to make, and there's disagreements. So it's okay.
Do you think the Iranians are trying to play us at the negotiating table?
That's it. No follow-up.
Well, I think, Jesse, everybody's always trying to play everybody. I think the president's attitude on
something they never used to acknowledge, but now it's just too obvious. Like they have to sort of like normalize the fact that you can see Israel screwing Trump over all the time. So, it's just the way politics work. I agree, but they never used to allow that to be known, But just really quickly, again, like the idea
about Israel spying on the United States and freelancing in Lebanon.
That's his question.
Well, look, I think obviously the Israelis and the Israelis in the United States, we have a lot of shared interests. Thanks to what's happened is to an objective. The president has been very clear here.
Sorry, I had the spot wrong.
The Israelis in the United States, the president has been very clear here, is that while Israel obviously has some objectives that it has, the United States' main objective in Iran is to ensure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
The point is, Vance is okay with Netanyahu and his government spying on Americans. He didn't even acknowledge that question. That seems alarming to me.
And we've actually, thanks to what's happened over the last few months, but really over the last year and a half, we've created the space necessary where the president believes, and I think that he's right, that we can get the long-term settlement to Iran's nuclear deal.
You mean like the JCPOA that was already accomplished, that you guys violated or that Trump did? Or, the space to make the deal? By what? By constantly getting screwed over? By constantly looking like a fool? Like constantly lying about what you're doing? The only things that have been happening consistently is you guys acting like you're in control and being shown to not be. Over and over and over and over. Iran's been in the same position since April, and they continue to make that point. We're going to get into the back and forth bombings right now. But think about what he's saying with what we know is happening right now. You just got to laugh at how these people I wonder what the turmoil must be, unless this is the design, for people like Vance to stand up and go, damn it, I look like a fool every day. Or maybe they're sociopaths and don't care. I don't know. But right now they're bombing each other, or at least there's back and forth going on. And what he's saying is contradictory to the reality.
Now, Israel may like that, they may not like that, but fundamentally, we think this is in the best interest of the United States of America. So we're going to keep on pursuing it because that's what the President of the United States was elected to do. That's what we have to do in order to properly serve the American people.
That's why he's lost Tucker and plenty of others. And yet you're going to pretend that this is the mandate that Americans want. Nobody believes that right now.
Do you think the Iranians are trying to play us at the negotiating table?
Well, I think, Jesse, everybody's always trying to play everybody. I think the president's attitude on this is we have to verify, of course. One of the most important things to whether this ultimate settlement is a success is not what the Iranians write on the paper, but whether they actually comply with some of the requirements of the settlement that we come up to.
Now, here's what's funny about this. It's obviously possible, even within exactly with what I think is happening, that every time Iran tells them that they're going to agree with what Trump says, like, think about that for a second, even though they know they're not going to. And that just speaks to the naivety of this team. But my point has always has been, you can clearly look back and see, right? You can see Iran has said, this is all we're going to accept and nothing else is going to count. And you get narratives like we just got today and yesterday, even though they're bombing each other, that Trump says, we're so close and we want a deal. And Iran said X, Y, and Z. And then you go forward a couple of days and you look back and clearly that wasn't true because Iran didn't change their stance. So within that, though, even though that's all true, you could argue that when they finally came to them, somebody gave the wrong information to Trump's team, and Trump, because oh my God, we're almost there, we did it, it's about to be a deal. And they're over there laughing that it took the bait yet again. I could see that, absolutely. And it still would mean that at the end of the day, Iran hasn't changed what they're actually demanding. They're just playing them for fools by letting them put that out there. I don't know if I think that's the most likely. Honestly, I still stand with, I just can't believe Trump's team can't make up a different lie. That's what seems to be the most likely Occam's razor, all things considered equal. The simplest explanation tends to be the correct one. That's what I'm leaning towards. But I just wanted to point that out because I haven't said that before, that it's obviously possible that Iran is just consistently feeding them the wrong answer at the peak moment and they just buy it every time. Consider that.
I think it's very important, and this is one of the big differences. You always hear people talk about the Obama deal and what went wrong with it. The number one thing that went wrong with the Obama deal, Jesse, is that there was not a proper inspections regime.
False. Just quickly go back and forth on this. But, this is what they always do, right? So there wasn't a proper inspection regime on the Obama deal. Well, firstly, you can just ask Grok, since this is the partisan argument that's easy to prove. And there's probably people that would ignore anything other than that. Like, the point is, this is an example where I use this to say, look at what the Republican narrative is, knowing Grok is going to deceive and manipulate where it can. And so that might reach people who want to only believe what Republicans are saying about the narrative. We could also just go to the actual source material, which is what I did first, to understand that there's an obvious documented, we've covered this 1,000 times before, by the way. But just in case that's what they want to listen to, yes, the JCPOA included a robust inspections and verification regime. Literally what he said didn't exist. That's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, the one that they broke last time. It had continuous monitoring. It had access to declared nuclear sites. It had complementary access to additional sites. It had monitoring of the full supply chain and had verification limits, which verified that it maintained 3.67%. But, facts don't matter to these absolute clowns. But let's go back to the point.
Sure that the Iranians could. There was not a proper inspections regime to ensure that the Iranians could never build a nuclear weapon.
Of course, they could have lied, and the IAEA could have lied, and everybody else could have been fooled, but the evidence doesn't back any of that up. So you can argue it's possible. Sure, anything's possible. But that's not what happened based on the facts. And it's not what happened based on what Iran said, what the previous administration said, even what Tulsi Gabbard said. But hey, she got pushed out. So yes, it doesn't matter.
And that's one of the big differences between what happened then and what the President of the United States would get to, assuming we're ultimately able to make a deal.
Oh, right. You mean the thing that they agreed to on the 28th that you bombed them for? Right. All this is easy to prove. They already agreed to what they want them to agree to now. They're not going to do that again, in my opinion, unless the U.S. gives them tons of things that they either don't show anybody, and Iran might even agree to let that slide so they can actually see an end to this, but it still ends up in their benefit. My point is, even the money, we'll get to in a second. There's floated things going around right now that I can't verify. But I do see a world in which Trump so desperately wants to stop his hemorrhaging in this conversation, would give them things he wouldn't want you to know about. Money, for example. Money that they stole from Iran. Yes, just like the Obama conversation, despite their lies.
So I don't assume that anybody's acting in good faith. Obviously, we've been very involved in these negotiations, Jesse. We're
not really. You've had an example where Vance went to Islamabad. 9 times out of 10, we're talking about Pakistani mediators handing things to the people that then relay them to them. They just can't. They're such small people that they need to make it seem like they're always in the middle of everything. Like, that's Trump for you. Like, I was just laughing about this today where somebody made an argument that people booed him at New York. Who cares, by the way? And they're such small, insecure people that he has to post something about him at a thing in New York and says, King of New York, on the White House account on Twitter. That's not just because he felt like that. It's because he's responding to the allegation that people don't like him in New York. This is the president of the United States. We're dealing with children, small, petty children, guys. It's all these people.
We're going to take the attitude of accomplish the president's mission, but verify over the long term that the Iranians are keeping their end of the bargain. It's a tall order.
Yeah, it's what we were already doing before. And even in the middle between all of this, the International Atomic Energy Agency was already agreeing to observe what they were doing. They just didn't have any caps on their enrichment, but they were still held at 60% because of the intermediate agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, as I've shown 1,000 times. So they had anything they're arguing right now was already in existence, and they blew it up with their literal bombs.
But it's one that the president has put us in a good position to achieve because let's be honest, Jesse, the Iranians don't want this war to continue. It's not in their best interest. And I think they're coming to the table, putting some real things on the table.
Nope. This is what's so sad. Again, how many times I can say it, you can clearly look back and prove that they're lying about that. Right this moment, you can now prove that because same thing. What are they putting on the table? Can you guess? They want control of the strait. They want the toll dynamic. They want money, and they want this. The same things they were asking in April. Brand new things. And the Vance team and the rest of them are just lying to you because they need to look like they're in control. That's my opinion, obviously. But How many times are we going to hear the same dance, the same narrative, the same song? How many times can they keep putting this
We're
out?
of course going to verify it, but if we get to this deal, it's going to be a home run win for the American people.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Just trust the plan, guys. It'll all work out. And Jesse Waters dutifully follows along because that's what his job is. All caps, 2 red lights. That's how you know it's important, guys. Here is, I'll just include, by the way, just for those that know the reference I was making, here's the actual International Atomic Energy Agency post from June 20th, 2025, that shows you that the things they were pointing to, claiming Iran was screaming about their, bragging about their enriched uranium, was literally something that was within their agreement. It was uranium stockpiles that remained under the safeguards in accordance with Iran's agreement with them. And that was the 60% beef, 400 kilograms or 1,000 pounds. And then, of course, the White House went on and publicly lied about this to 60 Minutes. It's just insane where we are, guys. Now, Daniel McAdams points to Mario Nawfal towing the line, as he always does, in regard to the Iran conversation and Trump being angry at Netanyahu. Just doesn't stop. Nawfal came out and said, Trump told Israel to stand down, and the message came through Fox News. This is on the 7th, mind you. We know what actually happened. It is the 9th, and we can see what's going on. So the idea that any of this, that Trump is in any way adversarial outside of him being used and probably being mad about that, but the idea is adversarial in the sense that he's actually pushing back on the agenda. From what I can see, Trump is either aligned with it or is incapable or unwilling to push back in regard to Israel and Netanyahu's agenda. He'll publicly say things, but I think behind the scenes is something different. In this case, we keep hearing what the Barak Ravid article, you effing and you lunatic. And then he went on to support him. And what you find out is behind the scenes, they lied about the entire conversation, according to Israeli media, that it was not even about what they said it was about. No cussing took place. It was frustration with the deviation of the social media posts. But God forbid, but shocking that they lied to you about this. Daniel McAdams calls out Mario Nawfal and says, why do you constantly amplify his fake news? Are you on Barak Ravid's payroll? Seriously? I don't understand why otherwise intelligent people like Larry Johnson and Doug McGregor continue to go on your show, Mario Nawfal. It's clearly pro-regime manipulation. I happen to agree. But they're all just out there going, it's clear that they're divided. And guess who came in just like I expected him to? Trump's pissed at Netanyahu, says Alex Jones. I said, this guy will never stop gaslighting you. This was on the 8th, the next day, where the argument was to try to get you to think that Trump was not on the same team with Netanyahu. And then what'd he do? As we are on the 9th, he completely sided with Netanyahu, as he always does. But here's the third time Alex Jones tells you he was right, that he knew that they would separate, and didn't happen. Here, Glenn Greenwald points out, he goes, I almost feel sorry for Trump. And this was on the 7th, for when he feels a need to yell that Netanyahu is not my boss. The whole, the lady doth protest too much kind of example. Trump announced on April 18th that he prohibited Israel from bombing Lebanon. They laughed and they bombed the next day. Every single time, including right now. Because right now, we're going to show you on the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, and the 9th, Israel's been bombing in Lebanon. And what happened in that little middle part? Trump said, Israel said they wouldn't, and we told them to stop, and we told them to stop bombing. It doesn't matter. And here he says, Trump wants a deal with Iran, but is petrified of Israel's lobby rage. Now, I don't know if I agree with that. You can decide. That's what Glenn is arguing, that that's what is guiding it. But here's the main point. Trump tells Financial Times, Israel would have no choice but to accept whatever the deal is that he agrees to. Does anybody believe that? He says he won't have any choice. I call the shots. I call the shots. He doesn't call the shots. That's an actual quote. I call the shots. I call the shots. He doesn't call the shots. That's really cringy, guys. That's Trump literally doing what Glenn is saying, going, I'm in control. Netanyahu doesn't tell me what, and then the next thing that happens is Netanyahu ignores what he was told, and they do it anyway, and Trump tucktails and follows Netanyahu. So, Janice Girl says, well, Trump and Netanyahu cosplay a fight, and the likes of Alex Jones continue to play into that for whatever reason, either stupidity or dishonesty. Leaked deployment orders show the U.S. has quietly deployed the 82nd Airborne paratroopers to Israel with mission to seize Karg Island and carve out coastal territory inside of Iran. And this is actually an article from Ken Klippenstein entitled Exclusive, U.S. Israeli secretly deployed paratroopers to Israel. It says, while the Pentagon announced that the 82nd Airborne, which remember that, by the way, it comes up again in a second, that the 82nd Airborne was deployed to the Middle East in March, it concealed a key detail. I'm sure you could guess at why. Some of those paratroopers were heading to Israel, as revealed in an Army deployment order that Ken has obtained. The military source involved in war planning tells me the deployment is tied to new U.S.-Israeli joint contingency plans, completed since February, for seizing Karg Island and carving out coastal territory inside of Iran. That's been floated more than once. It says, by keeping the deployment quiet, the Pentagon headed off public debate over a joint U.S.-Israeli operation inside of Iran. So the point is about, one, the ongoing Iran agenda, the deployment of American soldiers to the ground, which is already happening if you're paying attention, both through, any number of examples in regard to the people that were there beforehand, the deployment of weapons to the Kurds, all these different examples, or just literal deployment on the ground. It's all being lied about. The idea is that this is showing you that not only is that ongoing, and that despite the lies that Trump is leaning into this at the expense of Americans when not a single Israeli is on the ground doing any of this, but then also they were being lied to about the cosplay of them disagreeing, because all of this is happening as this is theater is playing out. We also, it brings to mind the report that came out on March 8th, reports of U.S. servicemen deployed under the guise of training. Remember that? I just think it's interesting that maybe this was more than we know has been happening, and it's about something much darker, I think. Now, on the overlap of Iran and the White House and the ongoing, whatever you want to call this, there needs to be a new word made up for the absurdity of what Trump is doing with this repetitive lie thing. It's weird. So the White House on June 8th says Trump on True Social, which then becomes the White House post on Twitter, says both sides, Israel and Iran, are looking to do an immediate ceasefire. Final negotiations on peace are proceeding, subject to ignorance or stupidity getting in its way. The blockade will remain in place, which, by the way, is an ongoing violation of the original ceasefire they say is still maintaining. That's just the dumbest thing in the world. And in full force and effect until a final deal is reached. So is the bombing of Lebanon, which never stopped either. Things should move quickly. Thank you for your attention. It's like the 95th time he said something like that. The idea that first of all, that Israel and Iran are involved in the ceasefire, which includes Lebanon, as everyone's going to need to point out, and that Trump agreed to before Netanyahu told him it wouldn't anymore, all on the record. The idea that you can't just make up a different argument for this. I said, just make up a different lie. Alter it a bit. It doesn't have the same old statement, unless, of course, it is what he was saying and that Iran is tricking them and they just keep falling for it, which is pretty embarrassing. But either way, what happened right after this? It's not a ceasefire. The idea clearly shows that both Iran and Israel are not actually leaning in the direction he's pointing to. So what's happening? Is he lying to you for the interest of oil, money I don't know, but it's getting very stale and everyone's aware of it right now. So here is the anti-war article about this on the 8th, written by Dave DeCamp. Trump says Iran and Israel must stop shooting after they exchange strikes. So this is the post right here. They must stop shooting. Okay, so this is on the 8th. So we just saw what he was saying before. So then all of a sudden we get some little skirmish. So right away, it becomes clear. Well, technically there's the comments beforehand and afterward. But the point is, he's been saying this for the last, months now. And after what was the similar kind of idea that, he's told them to stop. The last week, he's been telling you that Israel was told to stop bombing Lebanon. So we have this exchange where there was back and forth. President Trump said Monday that Iran and Israel must stop shooting. Comments that came after Israel bombed Iran following Iranian strikes on northern Israel in response to Israel strikes in Beirut suburbs. Pretty easy to see this. Of course, all of it stems back to the illegal war that they started with no justification. So it's not really hard to see this. But you understand that Israel bombed multiple suburban main downtown areas, and this continues to happen. So, and that we saw it when it happened. That was not based on anything. And Iran bombed back. Now, of course, what we get is this back and forth, right? Where Israel bombed Iran following Iran strikes in response to what they did. Israel and Iran must immediately stop shooting, he said. Israel launched strikes on several Iranian cities after Trump said that he told Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to stop Iranian strikes on northern Israel. Israel launched strikes on Iranian cities after Trump told them to stop. He says, quote, I'm going to call Bibi right now and tell him not to retaliate. He did, by the way. Each of them had their fun. Israel had its strikes and Iran had its strikes, and we need another one, or we don't need another one. This is, of course, according to Barack Ravid, which you should be laughing about right now because he keeps giving you false information. Rather, he tells you what they want you to hear. But understand that this is not what we're dealing with is Israel bombing civilian locations. Now, almost every one of the examples they've shown, like the airport, which is still disputed, by the way, or the we've gone over them. The tanker from the very beginning that was ultimately seemed to be a drone that was put out by Israel. There's plenty of examples we've covered. Is that ultimately what they do is bomb these civilian locations for maximum pain, which we'll go ahead and show you in a second, openly saying bomb the suburbs, Gavir, plenty of rest. But that's not what Iran is doing. Now, I'm not going to say that they're incapable of doing that, and I've shown you examples that I argue are violations of the law. But this is the U.S. and Israel bombing bridges and bridges and power plants and so on. Anybody in the world would seemingly, like the governments we deal with, would not balk for a second in responding to do the same thing. Doesn't make it not a crime. Any of them doing it should be held to the same standard. But understand how this started. That's the only point. But so what we're dealing with here is them telling you that this was supposed to stop, and Israel carried on bombing anyway. In Lebanon and Iran, both is the same point. The Wall Street Journal reported that when Trump spoke with Netanyahu on Sunday, and it became clear the Israeli leader wouldn't call off his plans to strike Iran, despite Trump telling him not to, Trump asked him to keep it limited. Now, what does that show you right there? Right, that Trump says he's in control. I call the shots, he screams. And then when he goes, don't do that. And they go, no. He goes, fine, just keep it limited. Pretty easy to see the power structure right there. The two leaders spoke again on Monday, and Netanyahu later said publicly that he would not launch further attacks. But he's continued to bomb Lebanon. And if you understand, it's been clear from the very beginning, Iran has made it stated it's part of this, no matter what either of you continue to say. No matter, and the same thing with Israel and the United States. If Trump decides to go, we're done, and Israel keeps bombing, they still see the U.S. is involved, or vice versa. So it doesn't matter, they just keep deviating from what they say. They have made the statement and they've stood by it. And so that means that Lebanon being bombed is part of this. The blockade being still there is part of this. That matters because that shows you no matter what they want to bend in the narrative, that they're still violating what they claim is their ceasefire that's never really existed. Now it says the two leaders spoke again. Now it says the U.S. tried to distance itself from Israel's strikes on Beirut, but sources told the Journal that Israel informed the U.S. of the planned attack ahead of time. And the U.S. also helped intercept Iranian missiles, meaning they lied to everybody. Surprise, surprise. Following the Israeli attacks on Iran, which wounded at least 15 people, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said that it targeted air bases in northern Israel, and Iran's Central Military Command, the Qatam al-Anbiya, later announced that it was halting military operations against Israel. So Israel bombs 15 civilian downtown, I shouldn't say, I think, I don't want to misquote the exact locations, especially since a lot of it's still up in the air, but many of them civilian locations. And Iran targets what was it again? I just lost it in the place. Oh, it didn't list it actually, just air bases. Now, we should question whether that's the case. Israel lying back and forth, Iran lying, it's all possible. But what we continue to see is them targeting civilian locations. The U.S. government targeting civilian locations when they bomb Iran. Not secret, it's not Gaza. And it says, though it warned that it would respond to Israel attacks in southern Lebanon, which continued on Monday. Still a violation. Netanyahu said in his statement that Israeli attacks on Iran were halted for now. So at this point, essentially, Iran stopped bombing and then Israel stopped bombing after the back and forth that Trump told not to do. And since then, they've been attacking Gaza and bombing Lebanon. That's how it's continued. Netanyahu said in a statement that at the moment they're holding fire because after we struck the terror regime in Tehran, it ceased attacking us. Not how that actually went, it seems, but it says, in the event that the terror regime in Iran makes the mistake of resuming attacks on us, we will respond with overwhelming force. The Israeli leader suggested in the same statement that Israel won't halt attacks in Lebanon, saying we continue to destroy all of Hezbollah's terror infrastructure. And by that, they mean the civilian locations that they covet. So Ryan Grimm points to Jeremy Scahill on the 8th, saying Iran has announced the end of its current wave of retaliatory strikes against Israel. Trump again claims negotiations are proceeding. Doesn't seem to be the reality. Iran has maintained it is open to a deal and says it is Trump who has prevented it in the past 3 weeks. It's the same point. As I've been saying, they're not, at least as I perceive this and as the continuation of it stays the same, is that ultimately they still demand the same exact things, which is what he's highlighting here. The same stuff. And so it's not that they're open for, well, I guess it is fair to say open to a deal, but open to the only deal that's on the table, their deal. That's the right way to frame that, it seems. And that could always change based on any number of things. But based on where we are and where it's been looking back, they're not open to some new additions. They're not open to anything they have to add. They're open to accepting of the deal they want, or they're not talking about it. That's post-April. That's what we've talked about. And so in the same point, when Trump says they're ongoing with negotiations, it seems to be the same lie to me. And that's why they've been saying it's them. They've been preventing this for 3 weeks because they know what we're demanding. They know we're not budging, and they keep playing this game. Now, it says the current focus for Iran centers on two primary issues, Scahill points out. Ending the Israeli aggression against Lebanon, as we've been telling you, and unfreezing Iranian assets as a condition for any deal. Now, we'll point to an argument going around that that's happening, But what's interesting to me, why that would be, I doubt Trump's going to do that on a public way and in the front of the deal. I find hard to believe. With all they've been saying about Obama and the money they gave, even though that was money stolen from Iran, and they've been lying to them the entire time about what actually happened, Trump doing the same thing is just absurdly funny. And I said the same thing before. If it gets to this point, how interesting would that be? And of course, they'll frame it as something different, even though they're lying about Obama. And it's the same deal, guys. They, as the government, stole money from Iran. Now they're just simply giving it back if that's how this works. Now, the current focus on the two issues, ending the aggression on Lebanon. So they have to stop the bombing of Lebanon, and Iran has not budged on that. Since they haven't, there is no deal. Seems pretty simple to me. Iranian military suggested today that regarding Lebanon, this on the 8th, that the red line is not just halting Israeli attacks on Beirut. They have been so consistent about this, but ending the attacks on the entire south or the entirety of Lebanon. So not just stop the bombing here, but stop your ongoing occupation and bombing of Lebanon. Israel's not going to do that. The Iranian military said today, if the aggressors and evils continue, including in southern Lebanon, much more severe and crushing measures will be on the way. Iran, and now this very well may be why they just said bomb them, or that Israel decided that, because it's pretty damn obvious that no matter what they try to wiggle around in, that they're not going to budge, and Israel is not going to budge. This is Iran also said that the condition for any memorandum of understanding with Trump and the U.S., a substantial amount of its assets must be repatriated. That's the point. Trump keeps insisting that he will not do this. Even though there's been floated internal arguments from anonymous sources that this is something they're considering, take that for what you will. It can mean nothing. If there is progress on these issues, excuse me, Iran has said it is open to resuming the negotiations on an ongoing memorandum of understanding. And again, it's the same point. They're saying that if we get this done, those first discussion points, and same thing with the negotiation on the nuclear stuff, they're saying that that's not even going to be on the table until once we get past this first stage and we see a month of nothing. That's what they were saying. So that's what I believe this amounts to, is that we're only going to even get into the conversation of negotiation once this is passed. Like we establish the toll, the straight and the control and the money. That seems to be the main things they're putting forward. The ball remains in Trump's court, they say, and Iran still believes it holds significant leverage. It clearly does. Again, I don't know how you can miss that based on the ongoing reality of the situation. You can look back and see, and it's clear that they're not budging. At the very least, that they believe that they have leverage. Trump keeps deluding himself into believing Iran will capitulate. Do you believe that? I don't know. It matters. It depends on whether you think Trump actually believes the narrative. That's hard to sell me on. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that he has knowledge that others don't, and that he can see what Israel's doing. So I don't know. I just don't believe that. I believe that Trump is trying to convince people that he has leverage and he wants to make it look that way when it ends. I don't believe it's the case. Trump keeps deluding himself into believing they will capitulate. The reality has been clear for weeks. A deal will only happen if Trump makes concessions on Iran's core demands. 100% agree with that. Without a doubt, Trump's people are trying to find a way to hide these potential concessions and explore secret tracks to meet Iran's conditions while preserving this fictitious victory narrative. Exactly. And I'll even argue that Iran would literally let him pretend he won to get what they want, because it seems they don't care about the framed narrative as much as these sociopathic children do. That's not to say good, bad guy. It just shows you, I would frame it as, better politicians, which is not a compliment. But you see the difference, right? These people are it's the same frame of Putin and the way he's conducted himself in regard to other foreign policy. He is a politician. He is a masterful politician. And again, that's not a compliment. It's the way that they're able to manipulate people and make you feel like they're not doing something wrong. These guys are just terrible at this. I sometimes think that's by design. Iran and Israel must stop shooting. Well, they didn't do that. Ambassador from Israel says Iran fired 11 ballistic missiles at Israel today. This is on the 7th. Each one of those missiles can level an entire neighborhood and kill hundreds. Did they? You're making our point for us. All said and done as of right now, last I checked, and it's hard to know for exact, about 24, I think it was 25 people have been killed, according to their narrative, from what Iran has done bombing in Israel. 25. Now, that shouldn't be ignored. Anybody being killed matters. But what I'm trying to highlight here, and again, that when you look into it, that's 24 IDF members, what we're really talking about. At the end of the day, what we're seeing is Iran, even as they're bombing into areas that are literally human shield dynamics, like Tel Aviv, for example, have only killed 25 people, most of which are IDF, which is most of Israel anyway. On the reverse situation, you've got thousands of people that have been killed in Tehran, in Beirut. Doesn't that show you something? And now all they want to do is make it out to be we're the victims because we bombed you illegally and you responded with restraint in targeted locations like you pretend you're doing. Now, you could even argue that doesn't mean that they're good. It just means that they recognize that there's, again, smart politicians, smart military tactics. You don't want the world to think you're chaotic. You don't want the world to think you're a terrorist, so you make sure you do the thing that accomplishes your agenda, but makes you look like you're the better side of it. I think Putin's been doing that for years. Either way, take it for what you will. This is the aggressor framing themselves as the victim. No self-respecting country in the world would tolerate such an attack, and neither will Israel. Well, thank you for making our point. Why would Iran let you bomb them with no justification and not respond? Rubio just did the same thing. His own argument made the case for why Iran had the right to respond. Now it says Israel is now targeting Iranian surface-to-surface missile launch sites, as well as infrastructure facilities relating to the energy sector. Oh, and a lot of civilian buildings and hospitals and nurseries. Yeah, just like every other time they bomb this country. The people of Lebanon have rejected Iran's proxy. That we're talking about is the occupied Lebanese government. We'll play a clip for in a second. Hezbollah and have told Iran to get out of the country. It's just the lies they spin are embarrassing. If Hezbollah fires at Israel, its command centers will be hit. It has nothing to do with Iran. Oh, it does. It does nothing to do with Iran, does it? Even though you've been telling us for years that Iran controls this group? I mean, didn't you just say Iran's proxy, but yet somehow it has nothing to do with Iran? Good luck working that out. Like, this is what it looks like to be lying about everything, guys. In your same tweet, you have to contradict your own statements. The idea is they've been telling you it's the same point, and that's why it matters to focus on Lebanon, but now they don't want you to connect them because they know it's connected, and they don't want you to stop one versus the other. They want to keep murdering people in Lebanon to their heart's delight. It's not, and people see it. Just absolutely disgusting. It says, everyone has had enough of this maniacal Iranian regime. Wow. Just read some of the comments. It's just people are just fed up with these people. Wyatt Reed highlights Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister, who says, I think Trump certainly respects the fact that we're an independent country. We were attacked last night by dozens of Iranian ballistic missiles, unprovoked. He says, we did nothing to provoke this attack by Iran. Again, does anybody actually, even people who are against Iran, unless you're just a dumb person or a dishonest person, you're going to go, but that's not true. I mean, yeah, Iran, bad guy, but come on, guys, like, we know that's not true. But see, this is my point, is that you're only going to get this weird category of people that you might as well come out and say the aliens attacked that day, because who cares? As long as it's Iran bad guy, the narrative doesn't matter for these people. And anybody else, there is a middle overlap there, but I would argue the vast majority of people are like, well, that's just not what just happened. Even their narratives make sure you know that's not what just happened. Doesn't matter, though. But it goes, and this is Wyatt Reed speaking, even in a country where lying is encouraged and those who don't cheat or mislead others are considered suckers. That's a real thing. How you pronounce it, I think it's Freyrim. This is an absurd fabrication, he says. Let's recap. Iran spent the past week, and this is just like before the 28th, when Iran went to the UN and said, they're about to bomb us. It'll be unjustified. And if they is, we're going to respond to the countries that are co-belligerents. It's all on the record. I've already shown it to you. And yet they bomb them unjustifiably. And then they turn around and go, look at what Iran just did. They're terrorists by bombing these countries, even though they went to the UN and made the case for why that was their legal response. Did the US do that? No, guys, they didn't do that. Even in a country where lying is encouraged, this is an absurd fabrication. Iran spent the past week telling Israel it would strike the northern settlements if Daya was attacked. So what we're saying is Iran was going, if you bomb the locations Israel, I just read for you as the ambassador was saying, is threatening, was or continues to threaten, we will respond. Over and over. Israel attacks that location. Iran responds exactly the way it said it would. I mean, you could map this out for yourself. This obviously wasn't the first time Iran warned Israel against attacking Lebanon. That's Lebanon, by the way. On April 8th, Tehran said Tel Aviv would regret its continued attacks in Lebanon. So the point is to understand that this, from Iran's perspective, is the same conversation. Now, it is, whether you agree with that or not, but it's not even about that. It's about the fact that they've laid that table very clearly. If this happens, this stops. So even if Israel goes, we don't agree, it's irrelevant. We know that Iran will not let deal happen if they keep bombing Lebanon. They've made it very clear. So then when Trump comes around and goes, we're so close, everyone's on the same page, you know he's lying. Because we know this is happening. It says, wind the clock back even further, and you'll recall. On April 2024, Israel carried out an unprovoked attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, in Syria, killing 16 people, including a Quds Force commander and his deputy. In June 2025, Israel sabotaged U.S.-Iran negotiations and started the 12-day war when it launched sneak attacks on Iran, killing dozens of generals and nuclear scientists. In February 2026, Israel and the U.S. once again treacherously attacked Iran, interrupting diplomatic talks with decapitation strikes, assassinating the head of state, and murdering 120, some argue 170, elementary schoolgirls. And this is, again, the 28th. That was the day they said they were just about to make the deal that they keep selling you Iran will never give. And they agreed. Oman's foreign minister said it on that Meet the Press interview. If we just give it time, we did it already. And they bombed him that night. It says, to any rational observer, all of these are obvious provocations. But for Israelis who claim they are God's chosen people and biblically exempt from treating the rest of us as humans, it's just business as usual. Daniel Davis Deep Dive says, evidence suggests that Israeli claims, which they did claim as always, that all missiles from Iran were intercepted overnight, it's on the 8th, were not accurate. Surprise, surprise. He says, what a shock. Something Israel reported turns out to be false. And this is the examples of the blasts and fires from the bombing of the locations. Netanyahu on the 8th, interestingly enough, comes out and says that by bombing Iran, they somehow prevented a nuclear attack. I mean, you just got to understand the what's the right word for it? You know, it's unstable. Like their narrative is just kind of like, it's like building on sand. They're so desperate to make this make sense. No one's buying these narratives because the facts don't back up what they're saying. So they just have to yell out like they were going to bomb the world if we didn't do what we did last night. And some people, like all of the usual suspects, pointed to it and said, oh my God, we just got saved for a nuclear attack. Didn't happen. There's no evidence of it. There's no evidence that they have the capability. It doesn't matter. But Netanyahu sure as hell put it out there. Overnight, Israel carried out historic strikes to prevent a nuclear attack on Israel. Remember, this was why he rationalized that it wasn't a unprovoked attack. We were defending against Iran's getting ready to bomb us with nuclear weapons. They just make this up every single time. Is it possible? Of course it is. But realize that every other part of the story, you know, all the things they need to be there to make that make sense have already been proven to not be the reality. This is a low-hanging fruit argument for people that just need something to push them over the edge. Interestingly, as we've been seeing every step of the way, it turns out there's actually more collaboration behind the scenes with Netanyahu and Trump and the allowance of what Israel does that Trump pretends to be against. As the dust settles, Sagar points out, it seems that Trump soft greenlit the Israeli attack on Iran and then further depleted U.S. military interceptors to defend attacks on Israel. Now, this is his statement, but it is largely what the evidence shows. Robert, by the way, is working on something right now that I'm probably going to put out tomorrow around, the potential responses that are happening or that are and then potential in the future. Brian Baerlich adds to this saying, U.S. claims of not involved in Israel strikes on Iran are false. Now, this is opinion, but I agree strongly with this and the continued point reference to Which Path to Persia, which is an important document that you should read. We've gone over 100 times in the show. Israel doesn't exist militarily without constant and complete U.S. support. I agree. Every plane, bomb, shred of intel comes from U.S., just like with Ukraine. Now, that's one of the reasons why some would argue that it's actually the U.S. that ultimately controls Israel. And in some ways, you can argue they do. But it's more about, look, either way, the point is, as long as you're considering one of those dynamics, I believe you're on the right path here because that's what we're dealing with. Whatever those two things are, whichever side is pushing the other or whichever side is leading the other, it's both of them involved with what we're watching. But it's worth considering that. It really is because you could see a world in which that's the reality. And then all of this is a construct to make you think it's the other way around. I could totally see that. U.S. policy papers have described in detail how to use Israel to wage war on Iran. It is. We've gone over that exact part in this document and maintain plausible deniability. Or I could reference again the clip from the Washington Institute where they literally say that's how you're going to start a war with Iran. If you're still falling for this propaganda, you probably aren't interested in the truth, he says. That's worth considering, guys. But again, my opinion is that I think if it is a balance, I think the scales are tipped toward the Israel influencing more of the U.S. than the other way around. But it could very well be both of different types of things. On military side, it's more this way. On, in Congress, it's this way. You question it for yourselves. But we can't deny the obvious influence, or rather, coordination on these agendas between the two. I think it's obvious that you can see Israel influencing a lot of this right now with Trump. Now, but is that a construct to make you think the wrong thing? Certainly ask that question. Here, Mencho Sit points out something that's important with Yemen that adds to this, but the rules of engagement are changing in regard to how Iran responded. The past 18 hours have been very interesting. This is on the 8th. Iran re-entered the war with Israel just to defend Lebanon. So that's the real point, is they bombed Lebanon like they've been telling you is a violation. And over the last so many weeks, it's been sort of building that, look, we're not going to let this continue. And so this was the change. Before this, they hadn't responded by bombing Israel unless Israel bombed Iran, which, by the way, speaks for the larger point we're always making. They're not out there just unilaterally bombing. That's the U.S. and Israel everywhere. Iran has been restrained, going back a long way. That doesn't mean good guy. It just means the obvious factual statement of what's been happening. But the point is, and by saying that, by the way, it's not implying the opposite either. I'm just pointing out that by stating a fact doesn't mean anything you may assume around it. But them responding shows a change in their engagement, which is that they're not just going to wait for them to be attacked first in regard to specifically Iran proper, but that they will attack Israel, occupied Palestine, if they bomb Lebanon or the few other factors that are included. And I argue that includes some, Gaza, Yemen. I'm not saying I know that for a fact, but I would argue they see that as the same larger conversation. In fact, they've said that, but as of right now, it seems to only apply to Lebanon and Israel, or Lebanon and Iran, excuse me. Now, they did this to defend Lebanon, but we also saw Yemen enter the war. That's kind of what I was going with that, is that I don't think that's by accident. I think this is coordinated. And you could argue that means that Iran controls these things. That's an overly simplified and I argue incorrect view. Could be. But I think it's obvious that we're talking about groups that are just allied with this and are all fighting against the same occupying element. And so either way, Yemen, and rather the Ansarullah movement, the Houthi movement, has risen to stand up against Israel now. And they were doing this before with Gaza. They've re-entered this into sort of blocking off or restricting their flow through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. How long have we been talking about this? U.S. asks for an immediate ceasefire. Now, that's not how Trump is going to frame that, right? But as this is all happening, what do we get? Trump going, wherever it's going to be a ceasefire, we promise, we're still doing it. So if you just continue to look back, you're going to see Trump pushing ceasefire while Iran goes, give us this deal or we're going to keep going. So what you see is Trump at his point of weakness. Unless that's what they want you to think and it's not true, it's what it shows. Iran promises a response if any Axis member is attacked. So we'll see how that goes. That would mean Gaza. That would mean any of the people that they're defending. So Mencho Sit also points out the Yemenis, this is just the map of it to show you, and here's the actual post they put out. The Yemenis on Ansarullah targeting Tel Aviv this morning. The Yemenis decided to ban Israeli navigation in the Red Sea. The next escalation, if the U.S. gets involved, will be a ban on U.S. ships and ally ships. So remember, just this is I'm glad the map is here for those that have been seeing me talk about this for a long time, right? This is the Strait of Hormuz, and that is where Iran has restricted the U.S. and people fighting against them. And Trump has sort of muddied those waters, no pun intended, to argue mines or insurance issues, and that's caused most everybody else to be tentative. The truth is, it wasn't ever shut down to anybody other than the U.S. and Israel. The mines, according to even admirals in the UK, are a lie right now. It doesn't mean they can't do it, but they haven't done it now. By so many other examples, just basic deductive logic. China's own ships have been going through there to Iran, even with the false blockade, or rather the incompetent blockade. It is there. And there's been, anyway, I've made this point many times. It is an argument created to make it look like it's shut down for their interest, in my opinion. But over here on the other side, that's the Strait of Hormuz, you've got the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And they've been trying to occupy Yemen for a long time to control it so they control that waterway. And they've been failing. But so now Yemen is stepping up. And here's why they've been trying to control it this whole time and shutting them down from that location point. Now, this is going to be a big deal. If they can effectively do this, because it's going to stop them, they're realistically going to have to go all the way around the Horn of Africa to get anything around that point. That's a huge deal if they can effectively stop it. I argue they're going to call them terrorists. It's not the reality in any sense. In fact, yet again, we're talking about something that, you could look at this in the same way. That, it's not to say that it's necessarily legal for Yemen to stop everybody they want going through there, but that the U.S. government has done effectively similar things in numerous locations in the world more than once. Both would be illegal is the point. So you're at a point now where you're being bombed and occupied and targeted and, they're going to lash out. Just like with Gaza, though, guys, I think it's pretty easy to see which side stands on the side of what's, whatever you want to call it. Fighting for the oppressed is what I would call it. Trita Parsi points this out, and I do. This is the same point, but sort of his framing of this. The magnitude of what just happened may take some time to sink in. This is the first time Iran has struck Israel after Israel struck another country's territory, but not Iran. This means that the battle lines have been moved. Iran's deterrence had already been restored to the sense that Israel knew that any strike on it would be responded to. But now Iran has proven that it will respond to Israel strikes on Lebanon. This is the first time in decades that a regional power has the means, capacity, and willingness to put hard power against Israeli military maneuvers or aggression against a third party. And he wrote a Substack if you want to read it. Whether you support it or not, you can't deny that point. It's obviously a change. Dropsite News highlights what Iran said on the 8th, and this just backs up the larger point that we're discussing. Not to say you should trust what Iran says or how they see it, but what it's showing you is what Iran is stating their stance is. And that means something in the back and forth of the narrative of Trump saying they're all fighting for a ceasefire. The point is that they're telling you they know Israel and Trump and the United States government are not honest about this. They know that they're not really fighting for a deal. They know this. It says the foreign minister of Iran says no one in the region believes that the Zionist regime, Israel, carries out any action without prior coordination and cooperation with the United States. The consequences of any escalation will also fall on Washington. Now, that's important. Same with Lebanon. They said if you bomb Lebanon, I don't care what you guys say, it's still part of this agreement and it'll count as a violation, or we'll now see it as bombing us and we'll respond. Same thing Iran has said. No matter what you do, if Trump, because they sense Trump's going to try to kind of wiggle his way out of this, that ultimately, if it continues, no matter who is doing it, you are still responsible. Now, you could take what they're saying there as the exact framing, as that they see the U.S. as the guiding force. Maybe they do. Quote, the U.S. State Department has explicitly stated that the main reason for imposing this war on Iran was support for the Zionist regime, Israel. That has been the official American position. Furthermore, despite the claims of U.S. officials, we know that CENTCOM is fully coordinating and cooperating with the Zionist regime on both defensive and offensive operations, meaning that just because Trump pretends, and maybe Trump's not even aware, just because he pretends like that's not what they want or he tells them to stop, that there's been numerous examples that have come out and said, despite what Trump yelled out on social media, that he was behind the scenes going, go ahead and do it. I support you. We all know this happens. And so at least they're saying that's what they believe, is that no matter what, they're behind coordinating these actions and giving you a different thing out front. The idea that the Zionist regime does not even listen to the United States and acts independently of American wishes or seeks to humiliate U.S. officials through its actions is something that can always be debated. That's interesting. So they're basically, like what I'm saying is that maybe it is that you have Israel trying to destroy or influence or is in control, and they're going, well, that's debatable. That's interesting. The United States bears responsibility as a party to the April 8th ceasefire understanding. Whatever happens in the region, whether the U.S. itself violates the ceasefire by attacking Iranian commercial ships or targeting southern parts of the country, both of which they've done, or whether violations are carried out through the Zionist regime in Lebanon with U.S. complicity, the direct responsibility of the United States is clear, and the consequences of any escalation will also fall on Washington, meaning that if Israel does this, you're going to be included. I think that's exactly what a rational stance would be based on what we've seen. Now, last part was the commercial ships and the blockade and all the different points. What keeps happening is that you have their blockade on Iranian ports. And so then you have commercial ships, not military ships, that are simply just coming into Iranian ports, and they act like that's somehow legal, that they can disarm those ships and stop them. In reverse, you have examples of them, there's only military targets being hit in most of the circumstance. So Trump has simply allowed himself to target in non-military targets because Iran may benefit from it during this process. And you're going to say their actions are illegal when they're controlling the waterways that they have strategic control over, and they are letting ships through that are not fighting them, and you create your secondary blockade and stop commercial ships that have no military. I mean, you just can't go. It's never been more clear that they don't care about anything. And I argue these people are just bad at doing it in a way that previous politicians have done, which makes it look like they're not doing what they're obviously doing. Who knows why? Now, Trump says today, And this is where we get into the current reality of this with the helicopter and the Apache and all the different examples. Now, all of that being seen is important because look at where we are before we get into this Apache helicopter point. It is undeniably clear that they are floundering. Israel's going to go in because they know that ultimately it seems to be the U.S., Americans, Trump, that are taking the brunt of the issue. So Israel's going to keep going because why not? If they keep bombing Lebanon and then they get, it's obvious that they had that intention to begin with. It's obvious they don't care about anybody but their agenda. And so in the midst of all of this, you have this Apache helicopter that suddenly something happens to. Now, I see it one of two ways. This was either created to give the air of justification for something that Israel was going to do and that Trump had no say in, or however you want to read it. They were going to attack, and so they had to make it look like they weren't just choosing to, right? Or this was one of three, or this was something that was sort of happened and that it utilized. And within that, you could argue that this was something that was done, like so sort of a drone was flown into the Apache by, let's say, a Iranian drone that's driven by Israel. And then suddenly Trump then uses that and thinks he has to respond. However you look at this, we're getting into the details. You'll see why this is really fishy. So Trump says this: I have just been informed by our great military. Again, that's the great military led by the religious Zionist known as Hegseth, that last night the Iranians shot down one of our highly sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the strait. Now, it's funny that he says it like that when not even his own military is saying that. Right now, it's being investigated that maybe it was that. And even if it is, it's that the drone shot it. Not that it was the way he's making it sound, it's sort of like it was shot down by Iran from the ground. And it says there were two pilots involved, both are safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must, of necessity, must respond to this attack. And they have. So here's the Associated Press. Trump says U.S. must respond after Iran downed U.S. Army helicopter near strait. Don't you love the title? As even their report goes on to say that we don't know. But of course, it's not Trump says. Well, I guess technically it does start with Trump says, but the way the sentence goes, usually Trump says at the after part. But, yes, I guess it's kind of a moot point, but the idea would usually that would be at the end to make sure we know that this is his statement. But Trump says U.S. must respond is the way that would be read. And then after Iran downed U.S. helicopter, as if it happened. These may be small points to some people, but this is deliberate. Saul Rod, for example, knows very well how these are used. These headlines are manipulated to make certain points. Anyway, June 9th. President Trump blamed Iran for downing a U.S. Army helicopter, an Apache, near the Strait of Hormuz on Tuesday, or again, so we're told anyway, and said the United States must respond to the attack. Nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond. Now, as of right now, as far as I can tell, I don't think we have the names of these two pilots, and I'm willing to bet you we never get their names. Have we ever found out what that alleged rescued pilot was? That AI picture that Abbott put out from Texas? I don't think they exist. Or they let him die and they don't want you to know that. Either way, we've never gotten those names. I feel like this might be the same thing. It means either they died and they don't want you to know that, or they just literally made it up. Now, that's just a thought. I mean, we'll see where it goes. But let's wait and see. And if we don't get their names, we'll have to follow up on that. The helicopter went down as the Middle East was still reeling after Iran and Israel exchanged fire the previous day in the biggest blow yet to the strained ceasefire. How embarrassing. In the Iran war, Iranian state television reported that Tuesday that the Israeli attacks killed at least 2 members of the country's air defense units. Oh, wait, this was in the wrong spot. Oh, it's the next one, actually. So this was simply just a highlight. Make sure I didn't miss that. Hold on. It is much longer in the other report. A drone boat rescued them. Oh, I'm going to get into that next. So yeah, I didn't even need to include this one technically. This one has more information, but I remember why I did it in general. So that one was more about the actual attack. Wall Street Journal frames this interestingly. Drone boat rescues crew of downed Apache helicopter. It's talking about an AI drone boat and makes this whole case. It starts with the focus that this has never happened before. An AI drone boat rescue these pilots. And weirdly seems to focus on like this new idea of using AI drones and AI stuff. Worth noting, I think. But anyway, here's what it says. The military is investigating whether the Apache was shot down by Iranian forces, according to U.S. officials. That's right now while Trump is yelling that we know it was shot down. The rescue marks an operational first for the vessel, which are part of the Navy's artificial intelligence and drone task force that is designed to widen U.S. military capabilities in the Middle East. The mission also demonstrates the dangers of operating in the region, where Iran has shot down U.S. drones and targeted American aircraft throughout the war. Oh, you mean the ones that are illegally bombing them and invading their territory? Might want to include that little caveat and the subsequent ceasefire. It says elite troops from the 82nd Airborne Division. Oh, you mean the same ones that Ken Klippenstein was telling us were previously deployed to Israel? That seems relevant. So here we are on the 9th, today. Elite troops from the 82nd Airborne that were secretly shuttled into Israel before, which arrived in the region after the start of the war in Iran this spring, contributed to the rescue mission. So weirdly enough, you've got this special group that was moved into Israel secretly who just so happened to be the group that was there to rescue these people. I find that to be strange. I find it to be strange that it was about an AI rescue mission and now it becomes sort of like the perils of Iran and bad guy stuff and why we need more AI drones is what this article is sort of doing. And it literally starts with that as the main point of the article. It's titled about that, as if the secondary story is the helicopter being shot down and Americans being at risk. So it says the drone boat involved falls under Task Force 59, which harnesses uncrewed boats and other drones powered by AI. I'm telling you, it literally goes on about this. This is the focal point. Now it says in Ukraine, the country's military has dispatched these vessels to target Russia's Black Sea Fleet. I just thought it was funny. I'm like, oh, you mean the Nazis you support? Those guys? Yeah, no big deal. Over there, our Nazi friends are using the boats that we give them. This is funny how casually that gets included. It's obvious what that group is. The Azov movement is controlling this the country of Ukraine. But the point here, guys, I still feel like I missed something in that first article. There's a point about it being a collision. Maybe I read it right there. I feel like there was something else I'm missing in this. Let me make sure I didn't do something else here. I mean, you got the gist of it. I just always do this where I feel like I want to make sure there's not an important point that I'm missing. So the gist of the point, just to relay what I know is the facts of the case at this point, is that what we're talking about is the dispute between whether or not, and it's probably like in one of these right here, as I always do, but the dispute is whether or not this actually was something that was a malfunction, which even, by the way, Trey on Fox News will tell you today, I'll play that clip in a second, that it could be a malfunction. It could be that this is something that was attacked, and it could be this is something they ran into, which is what's largely being reported by U.S. information, which is this something, a drone ran into the plane. That's what is being reported by U.S. officials. So how then would it be considered to be a shot if it was something? You could argue this was ran into them like a suicide drone. That might make sense, but then we should question where that's coming from. And secondarily, why it would even be in their interest to do this right now. Not that they're being attacked by this helicopter, but rather just that it was over there and they just shot it down for no reason. Of course, you could argue that it's because they were being bombed by U.S. and Israel. That would make sense. Something about it just doesn't line up for me. I feel like this is the excuse being manufactured to justify what they wanted to do. Just back to this point, 82nd Airborne Division. So again, this is a group that was secretly brought to Israel, right? And he says this was in March. And now suddenly they just happen to be the group that's there to get them. Now, maybe it's because they're close or closer. There were ships that were there, right? I don't know. Something about that just rings hollow to me, or that there's some kind of a coordinated thing happening here. And again, the Airborne Division is the one about the quick reaction force, so this just feels like it's sort of constructed this way. Now, take it for what you will. Saeed Mohammed Randi, professor of English literature and sort of a spokesman at the moment for the Iranian side, or at least I was framing it. For the record, Iran did not shoot down the helicopter, he says. And Trump is lying, but the Islamic Republic is more than prepared to teach the Epstein coalition a lesson. Now, here is what the guy, what's his name, Trey, had to say on Fox News. Trey Yingst. Of course, Nick Shorter says, breaking, Trump says they did this, and we believe Trump no matter what, because that's what journalists do. And then the video he shows you says the opposite. I just find that hilarious. Maybe you didn't even watch it. Here's what Trey had to say.
U.S. Apache helicopter went down near the Strait of Hormuz on Monday. Now, President Trump says the crew members are doing fine, and we are still gathering more information on what took place. It's not clear if the gunship went down due to enemy fire or a mechanical issue. This does come as the ceasefire with Iran is holding again as the region braces for what comes next. President Trump spoke after attending Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the Knicks and Spurs. He indicated that negotiations toward a deal are ongoing, and
By the way, I find it strange that he's talking in this weird cadence, like it's some pre-recorded interview, but he's speaking to the people in the interview, or speaking to the people on Fox News. He's talking to them. So they go, hey, tell us what the story. And the way he talks, it just feels artificial. It's the old dying media kind of concept. The way, I've done it before. Like the way that they level the way that they talk down to the thing they do. It's like this weird kind of like media thing they do. And I just find it strange that I'm showing this thing right now, but he's on this field. He's talking to people in that room, and the way he's talking, I don't know. I just find it artificial. That's how they are.
On what took place. It's not clear if the gunship went down due to enemy fire or a mechanical issue. This does come as the ceasefire with Iran is holding again as the region braces for what comes next. President Trump spoke after attending Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the Knicks and Spurs. He indicated that negotiations toward a deal are ongoing, and we could have a better idea of where things stand in the days ahead. The president also discussed his call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the exchange of fire over the weekend.
We had a very good conversation, and he was hit, and he hit back, and I can't blame him for that, but he was hit, he hit back, and now they've called it quits, so they're going to just leave each other alone for another week or something.
God, what a clown. And they hit back, yeah, so basically the exact thing that you told him not to do. But you can't blame him for that. I call the shots. Don't do that. You can't blame him for it. It just seems ineffectual, if you ask me. And the idea that you're kind of like laughing off the idea that, maybe another week or so, like it's almost like no one believes what you're saying, or that they don't believe they're actually going to have a ceasefire. It's just kind of gross. Like it's almost, he tries to kind of do this in a way that makes him seem like he's aloof, like I'm not involved, I'm commenting on what they're dealing with. It works for some people, but it shows you're failing, right? You know that you're in this agenda, it's your agenda, and you're kind of like brushing it off on somebody else. That's not what leaders do.
After President Trump called on Israel and Iran to stop shooting, both sides agreed. Since then, Israel has continued to operate against Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon.
So they didn't agree then, in case you misunderstood that.
Launching new strikes overnight and issuing fresh evacuation orders this morning. Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed his country overnight with a message for Hezbollah.
In the past 24 hours, Iran and Hezbollah tried to impose a new equation on us. This equation is intolerable and unacceptable to me. They thought they could fire from Lebanese and Iranian territory at Israel.
Okay, so nothing has changed. It is Hezbollah and Lebanon fighting to push off the occupier. You have Iran who's maintained their same situation, but and act like there's some kind of new thing they've imposed. You mean the exact same thing that we brought up last time, that this is one and the same, and if you bomb them, it counts as the same conversation? I mean, Netanyahu knows they just had this conversation, and yet he stands up and just yells out the thing that contradicts what they were just doing. Because all of the Zionists who are on his side are going to go, that's true, and if you say that, you're a racist. And people cower. The truth is, most people see this already because you guys just shoved it down our throats that this is not the same conversation, that we're allowed to keep bombing Lebanon. Then Trump had an agreement with them and they said, it's okay, we'll stop bombing Lebanon. And then Netanyahu said, I'm not going to do that. And then Trump said, I didn't say that. And it all kept going. Round and round we go. And yet now you're going to stand there and act like this is some new equation that they suddenly care that you're bombing Lebanon? Guys, nobody's this stupid. I take it back. Plenty of people are this stupid, but most people are not this stupid.
And that we would not act. That did not happen, and that will not happen.
With questions about if the ceasefire could be broken again, international attention remains on the Strait of Hormuz, where the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports is expected to continue.
Right. The blockade of their ports that civilian ships come and go from.
Says U.S. forces disabled an unladen oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman on Monday after it tried to breach the blockade.
Why is that legal? Is that a military target? No. It's a tanker. Okay, so you're arguing, well, we don't want them to have oil because they can use that. So then why not just stop them from getting food? Because, food will help them continue to fight the war. Is that not the same logic? It is. And they're doing that anyway. That's what their sanctions are largely meant to do. Stop medicine and food and what they need. But you have to understand, by blocking these ships, and by the way, attacking that civilian ship to stop them from actually being able to go in the port, that's piracy. That's terrorism. That's what they're pointing at everyone else doing. In most cases, they're not even actually doing that. Take Yemen, for example, and the Ansar Allah movement, and how many times they called them terrorists and pirates, and what they were doing was stopping them from breaking the law. Didn't steal anything, didn't sink a ship, didn't kill anybody. After all the times they were firing on those Israeli ships, they didn't sink one, they didn't take one down, they didn't steal one, they didn't kill anybody. Think about how crazy that is, because they're choosing not to. It's restraint, and they mean what they have to say, at least in those moments. And now you have them acting like that's what they're doing.
An FA-18 Super Hornet from the USS Abraham Lincoln fired a precision munition into the ship's engineering and steering rooms. Since the blockade went into effect, 134 vessels have been turned around and 7 disabled.
Now realize the difference is we're talking about ships that were bringing military things to Israel to continue the genocide, right? Now look, there was examples of different ships that were coming that there were, let's just even say that were, what was the example? That let's just say weren't military purposes. Well, in that same context, that would be a crime committed by the Ansarallah movement. But in the same reality, you can understand why they would try to stop them as they're conducting an illegal war and murdering their families. Doesn't make it any less illegal, right? That's the only way to honestly frame those things. It's clear how often this happens. So here is a quick deviation, actually. That's some new information that came up while I was starting the show. We're going to come back to this and go back to the Lebanon discussion. But as we were getting ready, I saw this taking place. Now, people, let me know in the chat if there's anything else that's happened beyond this, I guess, because I know this was happening like right as I was going live. U.S. and Iran zero in on 4 nuclear issue in talks. I don't buy this for a second, just to come right out of the gate. I don't believe this. I think this is another version of the same Barack Ravid Trump, cycle of the same story, the same lie over and over. We'll go through it in a second. We also have the example of this was the U.S. command coming out hours ago, openly telling you that they were going to conduct strikes, which they're now doing. And now U.S. says it's begun strikes against Iran. That's happening as of right now. After all that we just talked about, all that we were hearing, doesn't that seem ridiculous? It should. Now, this was first. The 9th, earlier. The U.S. zeroes in on these talks. Like they really want you to think that we're somehow just about to make the agreement. And it says, in the days before the latest flare-ups of violence in the Middle East, the illegal war they're conducting, President Trump's aides were negotiating with Tehran on 4 major elements. That's not even true. We're talking about people who are relaying messages through a mediator last time I checked, and we're acting like his or their. Okay, let's just pretend like that's what that is. 4 major elements on the nuclear agreement that the U.S. officials contend would grind the program to a halt for 15 years. It's just tiresome, right? Because so 2 things are happening. You got the U.S. government arguing that they're not only close to a deal, which we just saw, now that they're bombing is not the case. 2, that Tehran is even negotiating their nuclear agreement right now. As far as I can tell, they're not. Last Scale said the same thing. That's not even on the table until after they get past these first 3 points. And so for them to come out and say they're even discussing it, this is the New York Times, in my opinion, repeating what liars are telling them. Who knows why? It's what they do. Then going on to say that what that agreement might do, based on lies they're telling you, in my opinion, is that it might end up being a 15-year halt to their program. And then now you get people online. I'm seeing people like, I think it was Michael Flynn and others going, they better not do this. And now it's circulating that Trump might give them a deal. Oh, Trump's about to make a deal for 15 years to stop the nuclear program. And now they're bombing each other. It seems like nonsense to me. And the reality doesn't make any sense. And understand that even if it was happening, that the agreement was already in place before this. They were already agreeing to give it up entirely, not 15 years, entirely. And they bombed them. I'm going to make the point every time. It says the negotiations, according to the U.S. officials and diplomats who have been briefed on the condition or confidential talks, so relayed information from liars that have been lying to you the entire time, have gone considerably beyond discussions about reopening the strait, which the Iranians have all but shut down, or not. But what's funny to me is that it's the U.S. officials who have lied about everything have talked to us on a condition of anonymity about confidential talks that we can't verify that they claim have gone beyond the strait. Talk about great reporting. At the end of the day, we can see that's not happening, and it's the idea of the strait was a precursor to even getting into those talks, according to everything Iran's been saying. The result is what American officials describe, it continues, as the hazy outlines of an accord. We're just about to get there, Trump yells. Assuming the Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guard Corps and hardline Iranian politicians do not overrule Iran's chief negotiator or torpedo the much more detailed talks the United States has proposed in Switzerland. I just don't understand if whether this person has an agenda to lie, which is obviously a huge part of it, or it's like they just are trapped in this like fake news bubble that they don't realize they're in, that they're the experts on Iran, but that like the information they're experts on, none of it's true, but they don't know that. It's like these U.S. experts on Iran that are based on State Department talking points. My point is that ultimately what you're highlighting here is just a complete fabrication based on the narrative of what they say this is what Iran is and what they're doing. Not necessarily that there's not hardliners that might overrule that's happening in this country. But at the end of the day, the idea that you're talking about this like some kind of an ongoing deal that the hardliners are just stopping before Trump can get it done. And again, this is the adversarial media. Hardly. Now, this, of course, is the archive, and for some reason, every version of it blocks off the rest of it or doesn't give you entirely or stops you from seeing it. But I'll show you right here. This is what's happening in all these archives these days, guys. I don't know how they're able to do this, but they effectively can stop it from the archive side. Same with Wayback Machine. Some of them work, some of them ultimately end up, it doesn't matter, but it's included for you if you want to read it. So this was happening earlier where Dave DeCamp was saying the notable difference here is that they're coming out before they're doing it and saying, we're about to strike them. So he argued that would probably mean that it's going to be a larger attack. I guess we'll see as it goes forward till tomorrow. But he's right. This is different. Normally they come like after the fact because as Trump would always point out, why would we broadcast what we're going to do? Aha. That's what you should think about. This might also indicate that there's some sort of a coordinated back and forth, which has happened before. Not where I'm leaning at the moment, but the fact that they're broadcasting it when Trump tells you they never would do that seems to suggest that Iran might be aware that it's about to happen. Just a possible thought. Now, the U.S. says Iran has begun strikes against Iran, or the U.S. has begun strikes against Iran. Now, it says the U.S. military said Tuesday it's begun strikes against Iran following the crash of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter off the coast of Oman. I bet you this is where that part was that I was looking for. That U.S. President Donald Trump blamed on Iran. In a statement posted on social media, the U.S. Central Command said the strikes would be a proportional response to unjustified Iranian aggression. Think about that. Even if it was, this is a war that you started based on no justified, it's just hypocritical, as always. It comes after Trump blamed Iran for downing the helicopter and vowed the U.S. would respond. Seems pretty convenient, if you ask me. Iran state media reported that explosions were heard on the Iranian island in the Strait of Hormuz. Interesting. Didn't we just get done talking about Karg Island with the same 82nd Airborne that was supposed to be preparing for that possible operation, who just so happened to be in the same location to rescue the downed helicopter? If that same group goes on to take Karg Island, I think that'll give us our answer. The Apache helicopter, here it is, I think, that crashed went down after colliding with an Iranian drone. See, this is what I do. I knew this was in here, but I thought it was in the other category. So and this is a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the ongoing investigation. Now, that could mean it's a lie. But what I've been seeing mostly in this dynamic is that you're getting the person in the situation that for whatever reason thinks they want to put the truth out there. And I'm only saying this because that's what's ended up happening. Not that I would assume that every time. What we keep seeing is this, because we should never take the condition of anonymity thing. From my opinion, it's something you should note, but it becomes meaningless because they could not even exist for all we know. But what I've been seeing is that you get that person that comes out after Trump yelled something and goes, but here's what's actually happening. But I don't want to say anything because I'll get attacked for it. And then we question it. And then a few days later, you look back and it goes, well, they were right. And so here is an example of that, maybe, right? Where you have somebody in the administration that's going, well, it wasn't actually an attack. It was actually a drone that ran into the helicopter. Don't say I said anything. No, just consider it. I find that to be very relevant because what that would mean is either something that they ran into and then made all this up to cover up their clumsiness. That's one possibility. Or it was something that was driven into this helicopter so that they would think it was Iran. Or maybe Iran did it to take the helicopter down because they're bombing them. I mean, any one of those things would make sense to me. But I get my sense in all of it, as you see from the show today, is that this is something that was sort of manufactured, or at the very least, like I said before, like a false flag of opportunity, right? We're in a moment where we need this to go a certain way, so let's just blame Iran and move on. Even though there's no investigation, or rather they're still investigating to find out what actually happened. Aren't we tired of this? Trump grabbing that, or Biden, or whoever else, and going, China did it, or whatever, before we have any evidence, and then later finding out that wasn't even the full picture. It happens all the time. It says it wasn't clear whether the collision was intentional, and officials' statements only said the crash was under investigation, but yet Trump yelled out his narrative anyway. Doesn't that seem suspicious in its own right? Soon after Trump made his accusation, Iran's foreign minister said in a social media post that the strait is thousands of miles away from the U.S. shores, making the obvious point that why would this be a defensive attack in the first place, and why would you be hovering around Iran's shores? Foreign forces in proximity to our territory are at constant risk on account of their own excuse me, hiccups today. No, their own human errors. Plane accidents, as in PLANE, AIN, or at least that's what they wrote, or potentially being caught in crossfire. To reduce risk, best solution is for them to leave. Exactly. Because at the end of the day, they're the reason this is happening. Now, human errors, he puts in there for a reason. I find that relevant. It could be that's what he wants you to think, or it could be that that's what actually happened and they know that. And so this is sort of that ongoing game. I don't know. I think that was it. So that's where we are. Now, again, let me know if there's something that's happened beyond this, but this last I checked, they're bombing some locations in Iran or some areas in the Strait, something within this field of war related to Iran, like not in Iraq and claiming the PMU is Iran, right? This is the U.S. arguably striking Iran after that happened. And this is right as Donald Trump is yelling about how we're just about to make a deal again. It's silly, isn't it? Now, Gen X Girl put out this clip. Folks are reporting about $3 billion in cash being sent to Iran by Trump. Haven't confirmed this. Right now, my best I can tell, it's a narrative going around that might be true, and I've seen them develop into truth in the past, but it's just a claim circulating on Twitter. And Trump and his team have acknowledged this might be, or I shouldn't say team, but there's been examples from within his circle that have acknowledged this might be something in the future that was on the table. It says virtually no one is clarifying. This is the point I want you to hear. Whether or not it's happening, it might happen. And virtually no one is clarifying that the money that Trump and Obama before him gave and released is part of $100 billion of Iranian assets that were seized illegally due to U.S. and EU sanctions after 79. So after they took the country away from Zionist and U.S. occupying forces. So they stole the money from them, just like they stole it from Venezuela, like they stole from Bolivia, like they stole from anybody. That's what they do. It doesn't help to keep people ignorant of facts and cause them to freak out that U.S. taxpayer money is being sent. So what she's doing is trying to alleviate the people that are screaming about how, Trump's going to use our taxpayer dollars to give to Iran for his war. It's not what's happening. But there's so many weird narratives around this because the truth is that they lied about Obama doing it in the first place. That's not supportive of Obama. It's just the truth of what happened. And now they might get forced in the same position. I find that humorous. But either way, it's Iranian money they stole. And overall, it shows a weakness of this position. But here's Megatron just simply saying, and it comes from Israeli media. So consider that as well, that maybe that's the lie. Israeli media has been known to do that. But so the point is that it's questionable right now. Now, maybe since I've been live, it's developed further. I'll follow up the next show. We'll see whether it actually is happening. Now, back to Lebanon and to finish up today. Because, remember, this was the point of them saying that, Lebanon was the violation and so on. Trump says Israel barred from bombing Lebanon April 17th. Enough is enough, he says, right? Not hold on, not take a pause, barred from bombing Lebanon. We all went through this already, but just to refresh your memory. Okay. And then what they do, they carried on bombing Lebanon. Here, June 1st. And there was numerous examples in between each of these, by the way, but June 1st, Trump says Hezbollah and Israel have to agree to stop all shooting. Well, they did until Israel kept bombing Lebanon. And this we've proven this because they said, we're not going to stop. We have to keep fighting for this and that. It wasn't that they had to respond to Hezbollah, guys. It's obvious what keeps happening. Here's an example on June 6th. Israeli strike kills 3 Lebanese soldiers. Oh yeah, not Hezbollah, guys. Lebanese soldiers who are supposed to be on the side of the group that they're fighting with. But you see, they lie about everything. They just want to take the territory and they'll kill everybody. Women, children, dogs. They've made this clear. They lied. So here they are on the 6th when Trump is going, they're not going to do that anymore, bombing Lebanon and killing the very side they pretend they're on. Israel's on its own side. That should be clear by now. Here is June 7th, the next day. Israel military says it hit Hezbollah in Beirut suburbs. Hey, we hit Hezbollah in all those civilian parking lots and civilian hospitals and apartment buildings, obviously. And so, again, the point was just that here they are bombing Lebanon on the 7th. Here's the 8th. Lebanon says Israeli strikes kill at least 14 as attacks persist despite Iranian threat. That is June 8th. And that was meaning that Iran will respond. Now, this is the 9th today, right? The point is yesterday, the day before that. And, of course, right now. So no matter what you're hearing, Trump says they're going to stop because I asked. They're barred from doing that. We're going to take up. Doesn't matter. Israel doesn't care, and it does what it's going to do anyway. Maybe that's what factored into Trump's his thought process. Well, they're like Rubio told you right in the beginning that they knew Iran or Israel was going to bomb Iran, and that they thought that might mean Iran would use nukes, and so they then acted first. It may be very well that they were played with their own stupidity, their own lack of understanding of the situation. But either way, Israel was gonna, so we had to. Well, there you go. And so here we go in general, seeing that Israel is going to do what it wants and it's going to drag the U.S. down. Today, Israel has just issued an evacuation order for the entirety of the biblical city of Tyre. No more safe zones, no more fake ceasefire, no more good cop, bad cop routine between Trump and Netanyahu. Israeli ethnic cleansing in its full effect. Every time. What right do they have to make people evacuate from their own homes in a country that is not theirs? I can answer that for you. None. But they don't care. Trump and the rest and in the international community turn a blind eye. Drop site news highlights, this is further in the day, 9 a.m. today. Israel terror continues. Another carpet bombing campaign as Israeli warplanes started their daily attacks on southern Lebanon. They didn't even blink, they didn't even take a beat, guys. They just went immediately back to bombing as much of this territory as possible. And Gaza too, by the way. Not bombing as much as possible, but there are efforts against Gaza right now. They've stopped aid from going in yet again. We'll get to it in a second. Today, by destroying residential areas in the entrance of Tyre City. Residential locations. Every time, this is not Gaza, people can see it. Drop site news, Israeli attacks in Lebanon killed 29 people, wounded 133 others just in the last 24 hours. You know, the time when Trump said they weren't supposed to attack Lebanon. The toll from Israeli attacks since March 2nd has risen to 3,666 killed and over 11,000 wounded. Israel continued its attacks on Tuesday, killing at least 15 people and killing 28 wounded, or killing at least 15, including 9 killed and 28 wounded in this neighborhood. It says Israel also issued displacement orders for these areas, including historic Christian quarter. But of course, no cry out from the Alex Jones and Betty Johnson's fake Christians of the world who scream about how they are fighting for Christianity in the West and then ignore when Israel targets Christianity and the West. Lebanese civil defense and 2 rescuers are wounded in the double tap strike, as happens every time. They bomb something and then they bomb when the healthcare workers show up. This is every day, guys. Ask Gaza in Syria. It happens all over. Here is a little further, about 20 minutes later. Israel intensified its attacks on southern Lebanon city of Tyre on Tuesday, killing at least 17. This person has been following the stuff on the ground. This is from earlier in the day, but this is just a simple statement made by the president of Lebanon. He said, and this is what Wyatt Reed framed it as. He said, there is one specific state that's, quote, destroying the country for the sake of its own interests, Lebanon. And it's not Iran. But because Lebanon has a U.S. Saudi installed puppet, which they do, instead of an actual president, we're not allowed to hear who that is. Now, this starts with an interview with CNN here, and the president of Lebanon goes on to reference Iran to start the conversation, but then goes on to make a statement that, and I agree, I get the sense that he's almost trying to put out the statement that this is what they're doing. Either way, Iran is not doing what they're claiming. They're not bombing all the locations that it's important to understand that. So what he's saying here seems to reference what Israel is doing in Lebanon. That's interesting to think about because what he's not talking about, what he's saying is Iran's doing this and we're fighting Iran, but then goes on to make a statement about all the things happening in Lebanon, but Iran is not bombing all over Lebanon. So you'll see what I mean. Now listen to this, and I'll reference it again at the end.
What would you say to the Iranians and the patrons of Hezbollah?
We seek good relationship with Iran based on mutual respect, non-interference. But you remember, Lebanon is a sovereign state. It has sovereign government. If you want to talk to us, you're most welcome.
It's not true, by the way. Neither is Iraq, neither is Syria, and any places where they've literally done a regime change and put someone in power for their own interest. Not in Honduras, not in not in El Salvador, right? It's just not the case. That's not the point, though. It's what he says next.
But you do not interfere. If you're ready to help us, you're most welcome. But you're not allowed to interfere into the internal affairs. There is a huge difference between helping us or interfering into our internal affairs. Our interests maybe do not coincide with your interests. The people of Lebanon are paying the price. The people of Lebanon are being killed. Their houses or homes, they are being destroyed. To serve your interests.
So who's doing that? I mean, at the very least, you have to argue that he's saying that Iran being there is why Israel's murdering our people. Iran's not bombing civilian homes in Lebanon. So there's no way to misunderstand that. I found that really interesting. I think he's, even though he frames this as Iran, I think he's going to get punished for this by Israel. Either way, he's simply saying it's like the whole point about like stop hitting yourself kind of thing with, you're somehow saying it's Iran's fault that Israel's bombing civilians in Lebanon. How does that even possibly make sense?
They are being destroyed. To serve Lebanon are being killed. Their houses or homes, they are being destroyed. To serve your interests, not to serve the interests of the country. It's about time to realize this reality. You're not allowed to interfere into our internal affairs. Other countries are trying to help us, but you are not trying to help us. You are destroying the country for the sake of your own interest.
Well, I mean, obviously it's being taken as he's talking about Iran. That's how he starts. But why it made an interesting point. Simply saying there's only one country that's it's not Iran. I mean, you could argue Hezbollah is doing that in a different sense. That's not Iran, despite what they say. But even Hezbollah is not bombing civilian homes in Lebanon. So he's basically framing what Israel's doing to Lebanon, but then saying, but they got to stop. I find that to be very clear, personally. Like that it's almost like a cry for help, if you will. I mean, right now, you must know Lebanese people do not see them as, by and large, I'm not going to speak for every person in Lebanon, but from what I understand, it's a pretty understood thing, just like it is in Iraq or anywhere else, that's not really representative of you. That's an outside force that is taking control of your government. Americans are starting to see the same thing. Here, this is the same person, Courtney, what is it, Bunau Images, war correspondent. She says, I just heard the BBC radio say that the Israeli army was attacking Hezbollah targets yesterday. And they platformed someone bloviating about how Iran is occupying Lebanon. As a frontline journalist on the ground for the last 18 months, she says, I would like to reiterate, I have not seen any Iranian occupation bases in Lebanon. I have not seen any children killed here by the Iranian bombs. I haven't seen the IRGC massacring entire families on a daily basis. The IRGC has not shot at me or killed dozens of my colleagues in targeting attacks. Iran has not been systematically murdering healthcare workers, over 130 in Lebanon alone. Israel has violently invaded and occupied Lebanon. The flag flying over the base it all came is an Israeli flag, not an Iranian flag. Picture below. It's not hard to understand this, guys. The Lebanese Ministry of Health yesterday reported that 3,613 civilians have been killed. 11,000 have been wounded by Israeli attacks since March 13th. Important to understand that, right? So here, and just with the point being that it's actually Iran that's occupying them, BBC, not true. And to further add to the, here's Ben-Gvir who just said bomb the suburbs, that's how you make them suffer. Here's what he just said. Israeli minister calls for the kidnapping of Lebanese women and children to break their morale. Israeli National Security Minister Ben-Gvir urged the political security cabinet to abduct and imprison Lebanese women and children as a psychological warfare tactic. Guys, do you understand this is not some fringe thing? It's him not being afraid to be what they all are doing behind the scenes when it comes to the dark parts of Zionism. That's not to say everybody's of the same mind. There's been Zionists in this cabinet that have pushed back on some of the harder things, but still are okay with killing Palestinians. You have to understand that this is, if you go back to the history, you go back to the Lehi and Ergun and understand what these pins they still give today represent. They proudly point to these dark things they did. It's not a secret, guys. And I've gone over this extensively. The guy they had going around in the beginning that was speaking to IDF was saying, go out there and kill the women and children. It was all on record. So here, he's openly saying, go get them and make them suffer. That's what you can understand is actually one of their tactics. Whether it's mowing the lawn or any of these different things they do, that's what their game is. And so he's not afraid to say it. And many of them are getting mad because he's making that very obvious. Now it says, during a high-level ministerial meeting of reviewing expanded military calculations, Ben-Gvir demanded that Tel Aviv abandon conventional strategy and explicitly target social and familial core of Lebanese resistance network. I argue that's already what they do, quite frankly. But as Zachary Foster, who has a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, says, steal their women and children is the new Zionism. You can't make this up anymore. Now, to finish, I guess, beside these last few points about Gaza, Rami Abdul, the assistant professor of law and finance, chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group, says in Gaza, Israel burned both people and land with white phosphorus, while much of the world looked away. During the day in broad daylight, so you can't argue it's a signal, you can't argue it's illegal. Now, it's used on people, which melt their skin off, but it's also used in agricultural areas because it makes the land almost impossible to continue to use. So he says today, the same scenes are unfolding in Lebanon. Surprise, surprise. Before the eyes of the world, yet meaningful action remains absent. Videos collected by the New York Times show how the Israeli military has deployed ammunition that can be extremely harmful over populated areas. Oh, you mean white phosphorus. But I guess you forgot how that word goes, New York Times. Either way, let's just even pretend that you don't believe this. Well, it doesn't matter because it's been documented for decades, going back a long way. Israel does this. The U.S. government does this. In fact, they've often rationalized it, even depleted uranium munitions because the other guys did so or whatever. Half the time, it's not even true. But then that makes you just as terroristic as the group you claim you're fighting, doesn't it? January 2009, Amnesty International. Israel occupied Palestinian territories. Israel's use of white phosphorus against Gaza civilians, quote, clear and undeniable. Oh yeah, and nothing happened because that's the world we're in right now. Rain of Fire, 2009. Israel's unlawful use of white phosphorus in Gaza. Yeah, and nothing happened. Here is B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group. Calls for a Gaza white phosphorus probe. Why? Because they're being caught using white phosphorus. October 12th, 2023. Totally didn't start on October 7th. White phosphorus used in Gaza and Lebanon. Used in populated areas pose grave risk to civilians. I mean, because these are photographed overpopulated civilian areas like Beirut. Here is October 12th. Different story, used again. Israel appears to use white phosphorus in Gaza. 2023. Here is October 31st. That's 3 examples, and it's more than that, by the way, just in October, post-October 7th. Evidence of Israelis' unlawful use of white phosphorus in southern Lebanon. Realize, we're talking about like post-October 7th, but in Lebanon. That shouldn't be shocking to anybody paying attention, but for those who somehow still think it's separate, it's not. And this is a show we did on November 3rd, 2023, which discussed Israel's use of white phosphorus on a UN school. Wasn't even the first time, by the way. Here is a Washington Post article from December 11, 2023. Israel used U.S.-supplied white phosphorus in Lebanon attack. Not the same one. It's happened more than once. Surprise, surprise. Here is even the Times of Israel from June 5th, 2024. Tons of examples in between that, by the way. Israel using white phosphorus on residential buildings in Lebanon, says the Human Rights Watch. Over and over and over. You just can't stop it, guys. It's all, I mean, I shouldn't say it like that. I mean, the sense that I didn't even say the right words. You just can't. What they're doing is in your face. They want you to see it, I argue, because at the end of the day, it's about some sort of the point is knowing they can do this. Knowing, like, this is my point about Israel coming back and showing you and yelling the thing that they know some of us will see that contradicts what the propaganda says in the U.S. They understand that. They know some of us will see it. Now, why would that be? Doesn't that seem to like let the cat out of the bag? Well, there's a level of this that's about demonstrating the control over you. It's every day. If we can't see that by now, where we can have examples of them raping people in the prisons, of bombing, of starvation, torture, everything, killing their own people as they come with their hands up going, please don't shoot me. And they shoot 3 IDF members because they were taken. I mean, or rather, excuse me, not IDF members. Well, technically previously, but Jewish people that were taken by Hamas. See if that, there it is right there. In case they don't remember what this topic is. Hostages shot by IDF who put SOS written in food on a blanket. I just can't get past how obvious all of this is. These were Jewish members that were taken from Israel who were kidnapped. Or I guess in this case, I believe they were all IDF members. So they were, prisoners of war. Either way, they were either let out or got out, and they went out there, were speaking in Hebrew, going, we're hostages, don't shoot us. They killed one of them right then. 2 of them ran behind the corner, and they were yelling, please don't shoot us. And they came out and they shot both of them too. Guys, it's even saying it out loud, it seems like it's easily identifiable. It's written in this BBC article and plenty of others. Hostages were shot by IDF, put an SOS sign written with leftover food. The idea that they literally waited, it was like minutes, they were waiting, going, please come back out, and then murdered them. That's what Hannibal Directive looks like. Either way, the larger point, guys, is it's in your face. It always has been, and you know that. But so does everybody else. And it doesn't stop. You can't miss that. Drop site news. Israel has closed all crossings into Gaza and halted the entry of humanitarian aid. following Iran's retaliatory strikes on Israel. Oh, so they stop bombing Iran, but they just choose to start arbitrarily suffocating and starving and torturing and raping the Palestinians because why not? Yes, that's what Israel does. Israel has imposed a similar blanket closures during previous periods of regional escalation, including immediately after the outbreak of war in late February. Well, as we just heard, and why I was pointing to it, they made it clear that this was included. At least I thought it was clear. So here we are again, where they say, well, you can't bomb Gaza. You can't starve Gaza, just like you can't bomb Lebanon. And they're going to make this another dynamic where they have to debate it. And it's going to continue. I'm not saying I hope that or I think that, and that's what will happen if that's the way that goes. So Brian Grimm adds in the same breath, Israel says it's unfair for Iran to defend Hezbollah because those are different conflicts, and then takes out its anger on humanitarian orgs delivering aid to Gaza. That's what terrorism looks like. Now, a larger report you might have seen, Israel has killed 978 Palestinians and launched more than 1,400 airstrikes in Gaza since the ceasefire started. It's just super. We even have to say that out loud. Israeli forces have carried out at least 3,189 ceasefire violations across Gaza since they agreed to supposedly have a ceasefire. It's insane, guys. Everyone knows that because it's not secret. But it's not a violation because it's a fragile ceasefire, apparently, that Trump says means they can fire, but not Gaza, not Palestinians, but Israel could bomb and stuff, and it's still a fragile ceasefire because that's the place in the world we're in, apparently. No, that's just dumb, guys. Sarah Abdallah points out that Israel settlers are now currently burning Tibet in occupied Palestine right now. The village has stood for 1,000 years, a place where Jesus once walked, home to the oldest living Christian community in the world, and not a peep from Western mainstream media. Not a peep from the Benny Johnsons of the world who scream about why they're defending the Christian world and then ignore when Christianity gets attacked by Israel. It's not about one religion or the other. I'm just highlighting the hypocrisy of these fake people. The truth, guys, it's about defending anybody who's being oppressed and attacked and raped and tortured and everything else we're dealing with. You should have the humanity in you to stand up for anybody that's suffering like that. At the end of the day, guys, it's never been more clear. So I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for tuning in. Get it out there. Get this in front of people. Have these conversations around the dinner table with your friends. Just get it out there. I know it can be uncomfortable, but the point is that if you care, I mean, it's your choice, obviously, but if you want to do that and you care about the information, find the time to talk about people you care or with people you care about. It matters more than ever, I argue. But thank you for tuning in, guys. Thank you for the support. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.